Chapter 10:16. Greetings to General Liu, General Leng. Zhang Baiwan saw Lu Jingxian and Ling Huai sitting at the head of the table. He shrunk his neck and cupped his hands in greeting. Although he was desperate for money, this was the first time he had faced soldiers with killing intent like Lu Jingxian and the others. As for the generals he had seen in Nanjing, compared to Lu Jingxian and the others, they were not worth mentioning. Lu Jingxian smiled and said, "Lord Zhang, there is no need to be so polite. This matter is all thanks to Lord Zhang." Zhang Baiwan repeatedly waved his hand and said, I don't dare. General, just call me Zhang Baiwan. Since it is Princess Ding's order, how can I not obey? General, rest assured, after today, this one promises that Mo Jingli will not be able to transport half a grain of grain from Jiangnan. Lu Jingxian nodded with satisfaction. Seeing that Zhang Baiwan was still somewhat nervous, he smiled and comforted him. Lord Zhang, rest assured, the princess has already made arrangements. This general promises that even if the news of you relying on the Prince Ding mansion spreads to Jiangnan, your family will not be in any danger. Zhang Baiwan's eyes lit up. They were most worried about being discovered by Mo Jingli. After all, their roots were still in Jiangnan, and Mo Jingli still had the final say in Jiangnan. Lord Zhang, there is a matter that requires you to return to Jiangnan. I don't know if it is possible. Mo Xiuyao, who had been sitting on the side without speaking, suddenly opened his mouth. In order to hide his whereabouts, Mo Xiuyao had always disguised himself in the army. She didn't have that obvious white hair, and she had an ordinary face. Even if his aura was shocking, it was difficult for people to associate him with the deceased Prince Ding. Zhang Baiwan hesitated for a moment. He looked at Lu Jingxian and said, Lu Jingxian said, "This is Yi." Although Zhang Baiwan didn't know who Yi was, he at least remembered that Princess Ding's surname was Yi. Now that Prince Ding was gone, wasn't Princess Ding in charge of the Prince Ding mansion? Moreover, judging from Lu Jingxian's attitude, he knew that he could not afford to offend this person. He hurriedly said respectfully, "Young master, please instruct me." Mo Xiuyao took out a letter and handed it to Zhang Baiwan. "Please take this letter back and deliver it to the person on the envelope." Zhang Baiwan was stunned. He said with some suspicion, "That's it." Originally, he thought it was something important. He didn't expect that it was just a simple letter. Anyone could do this kind of thing. This Yi had specifically asked him to deliver the letter, so he couldn't help but feel a trace of suspicion. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. "Lord Zhang, there is no need to hesitate. It is indeed just a letter." Chapter 10:17. Early in the morning, when the Mahist army beat the war drums again, the Chu army had suffered a crushing defeat. The Mahist army opened the gates of Liang City without expending much effort. Almost all of the generals had disappeared, and at least half of the soldiers were unable to participate in the battle. When the soldiers on the city walls saw the white-haired man in white, they immediately lost all of their courage. In an instant, the 800,000 soldiers were utterly defeated. At this time, Mo Jingli was still in the governor's office in the city, unaware of what had happened. The injury this time was undoubtedly a huge blow to him, both physically and mentally. Especially when he was still suspicious of whether Mo Xiuyao was still alive, Mo Jingli's temper became even more strange and unpredictable. Being heavily injured, it was difficult for him to even get out of bed, let alone personally command the battle. Emperor! Not good. When Mo Jingli was once again enraged at the imperial physician who had knelt down, the panicked footsteps of an attendant came from outside the door. Mo Jingli frowned and said unhappily, "Get in here." "What is it?" The attendant knelt on the ground and shouted in fear, "Emperor, the Mahist army has attacked." "What?" Mo Jingli suddenly stood up and grimaced in pain. How could the Mahist army attack so quickly? It wasn't that Mo Jingli was arrogant and didn't believe in the Mahist army's abilities. It was that there were 800,000 soldiers in Liang City. Unless these soldiers all surrendered at the same time, the Mahist army would not be able to attack so silently. It's true, all of the generals above the rank of deputy general have disappeared. Half of the soldiers suddenly had a stomachache. Also, someone seems to have seen Prince Ding appear at the city gates. The attendant who came to report didn't see Mo Xiaoyao himself, and the person who came back with the report didn't say anything clearly either. After all, the already dead Prince Ding suddenly appearing at the city gates scared many people. Most of the normal soldiers couldn't imagine that Prince Ding had been killed. Their first reaction was to think that they had seen a ghost. Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingli's face paled. Even his hands under his sleeves couldn't help but tremble. What happened? Find out for me. The attendant said in a trembling voice, Emperor, the Mahist army has already attacked the city gates. We should escape. Escape? Mo Jingli's eyes filled with blood. Where can I escape to now? The attendant advised, as long as there's life, there's hope. If we're caught by Prince Ding. The attendant trembled. He was Mo Jingli's trusted aide. If he was caught by Prince Ding, he would definitely die. They had heard of Prince Ding's reputation many times over the years. Hearing the attendant's words, Mo Jingli's expression changed slightly. His eyes flickered. This battle was very easy. There were almost no casualties on either side. When the white-clothed Prince Ding elegantly landed in the middle of the largest street in Liang City, everyone couldn't help but stop the weapons in their hands. They heard Mo Xiaoyao's voice spread in all directions, all soldiers of Dechu State, put down your weapons. I will let bygones be bygones. Some people hesitated. These people were all normal soldiers. Without a general to lead them, they were like a sheet of loose sand. They didn't even know what to do next. The Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion were the places that every native of Dechu State revered the most. The Dechu State's past glory, protected by the Mahist army, was also the deepest memory of everyone who experienced the Dechu State's war. Soon, some people threw down the weapons in their hands. If there was one, there would be a second. Soon, the sound of weapons falling to the ground could be heard throughout the street. The commoners who had been hiding in their homes all came out. With Chu Xiaoying as the leader, the masters of the noble families in Yunzhou all came forward to welcome him. This commoner congratulates His Highness Prince Ding. Welcome His Highness Prince Ding. Long live Prince Ding. The crowd erupted into cheers. Soon, the cheers swept through the entire Liang city like a wave. It was expected that the siege would last for a long time, but it was resolved with almost no casualties. The generals of the Mahist army all showed gratified smiles. Ling Huai stood by the street and looked at Lu Jingxian, who was not far away. He said with a smile, one person can really fight against 1,000,000 soldiers. In the whole world, except for His Highness Prince Ding, who else can have such a reputation? As a veteran general of the Mahist army, Lu Jingxian also felt honored. He nodded and said with a smile, General Leng is right. Except for Prince Ding, who else can have such a reputation in the whole world? Ling Huai smiled faintly. Although the battle with the West Hill had not been decided yet, judging from Prince Ding's deployment, it was clear that the Xiling army's good days were about to come to an end. In the whole world, except for Prince Ding, who else could control it? The world that had been separated for hundreds of years was finally going to be united again in the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. A true imperial dynasty was about to arrive. Even a veteran like Ling Huai could not help but feel excited. I am about to send troops to the West Hill. All soldiers of the Dechu state who are willing to follow I to fight the West Hill, follow I tomorrow. Those who are not, stay in Liang. After the battle is over, you can go back to Jiangnan, Mo Xiaoyao said faintly. We are willing to follow His Highness Prince Ding to fight the West Hill. We are willing to follow His Highness Prince Ding. We pledge our lives to follow Prince Ding. Dechu that was on the verge of collapse and Ding Wangfu that was at the peak of its power. The incompetent and temperamental king of Chu and the wise and far-sighted Prince Ding. Mo Jingli, who used soldiers as cannon fodder, and Mo Xiaoyao, who loved soldiers as if they were his children, did not need to be chosen. Mo Xiaoyao nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Starting immediately, all of the Chu army in Liang will belong to the Mahist army. We pledge our lives to the prince. After instructing Lu Jingxian and Ling Huai to settle down the soldiers of the Dechu state who had just surrendered, Mo Xiaoyao led people to the governor's manor where Mo Jingli was. He entered Mo Jingli's room with familiarity and saw only the imperial physician and attendants who had died. Mo Jingli himself was nowhere to be found. Mo Jingli escaped. Prince, I will immediately send people to search for him. Su Qingfeng said in annoyance. Previously, he had only sent people to surround the governor's manor and did not send Qilin to keep an eye on it. Who would have thought that Mo Jingli would still be able to escape from the governor's manor after being surrounded by so many soldiers? Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, Go, don't blame yourself. Compared to taking over Liang City, Mo Jingli is not a big deal. Although on the surface it was taking over Liang City without shedding a drop of blood, a lot of blood had been spilled. Mo Jingli's trusted guards, the shadow guard of the Dechu state's imperial family, some of the generals who were still loyal to Mo Jingli, and some of the families who had already surrendered to Mo Jingli needed to be cleaned up as soon as possible. Also, as the emperor, how could Mo Jingli not have a shadow guard? Although the shadow guard of the Dechu state's imperial family could not compare to the Mahist army's Qilin, they were not any worse than Lei Jinting's gold-clothed guards. They could not fight head-on, but it was not difficult to escape with one person. Suppressing the fear in his heart, the attendant said in a low voice, Your Majesty. Prince Ding has subdued all of the soldiers in Liang City. Yesterday morning, he took the soldiers and left Liang City to head west. The gloomy room was silent for a long time. After a while, Mo Jingli's voice slowly and fiercely sounded. Mo Xiaoyao took my soldiers to fight against Lei Jinting. Your Majesty, yes. The 800,000 Mahist army in Liang City have all submitted to Prince Ding. The attendant said in a suppressed voice. Bastards! These traitors! I will kill all 9 generations of their families. With a whoosh, something flew past the attendant's ear and landed on the floor behind him. That attendant's legs gave out and he quickly fell to the ground. Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please take care of your body. Mo Jingli smiled coldly. He stared at the attendant kneeling on the ground and said, Take care. You all want me to die, right? This servant doesn't dare. Your Majesty, please have mercy. The man on the ground said in a trembling voice, Your Majesty. Your Majesty, please calm down. When we return to Jiangnan, it won't be too late to find the Prince Ding mansion for revenge after we reorganize the soldiers. Right now, the north is almost completely filled with the Prince Ding mansion soldiers. We shouldn't stay here for long. After venting, Mo Jingli gradually recovered a bit of his consciousness. He looked at the sweating attendant in front of him and said coldly, Stand up. The attendant knew that he had passed today and secretly let out a sigh of relief. He quickly thanked the emperor and stood up. His respect seemed to make Mo Jingli very satisfied. Mo Jingli's voice also became more peaceful. Go prepare. We'll return to Jiangnan tomorrow morning. Yes, yes, Your Majesty, Lord Chiu requests an audience. Outside the door, a guard reported. Mo Jingli frowned slightly and said with some displeasure, "What is he doing here?" Outside the door, Lord Chiu's voice was still slightly panting. It was clear that he had hurried in. He said, "Your Majesty, I have an urgent matter to report." "Come in." Lord Chiu pushed open the door and entered. He frowned at the darkness in the room. Just as he was about to say something, Mo Jingli asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Lord Chiu took out a folded piece of paper from his sleeve and said, "Your Majesty, please take a look. I just tore this from a county town not far away. It's a joint announcement made by several aristocratic families in Yunzhou." Mo Jingli suddenly sat up and said, "Chu Xiaoying. Quickly, let me see." The attendant took the paper from Lord Chiu's hand and presented it to the emperor. He also lit a candlestick not far from the bedside. Only then did the two of them see Mo Jingli's appearance on the bed clearly. Because of his serious injuries and the anger of the past few days, Mo Jingli's face was very pale and he had become very thin. Most importantly, he had a feeling of extreme disharmony. Lord Chiu frowned and didn't dare to look again. He was neither Mo Jingli's confidant nor an important official. He didn't know Mo Jingli very well. Although he knew there was something wrong with the emperor's appearance, he didn't have time to care about these things right now. Mo Jingli unfolded the paper in his hand. The smile on his lips froze. What was written in the notice was not what he thought was criticizing Mo Xiuyao and Prince Ding's various crimes and declarations of loyalty to him. Instead, it was various accusations against him. From him poisoning Mo Jingqi, putting the Empress Dowager under house arrest, killing Mo Xuyun, to him abandoning the city and fleeing, forming an alliance with the northern tribes of Xiling and so on. Everything was described clearly as if he had seen it with his own eyes. Sometimes, the pen of these literati was sharper than a knife. In their words, Mo Jingli was a despicable person who killed the emperor and seized the throne. He was unfilial and disregarded the safety of the world. What made Mo Jingli even angrier was that this announcement had been posted before the Maoist army attacked Liang. The signatures at the bottom indicated that the announcement had been made the day after Chu Xiaoying declared his loyalty to him. The people who signed the announcement were the heads of the families who had declared their loyalty after Chu Xiaoying. Chu Xiaoying. Mo Jingli gritted his teeth. His gaze shot towards Lord Chiu like lightning. Why wasn't there any news in Liang before? Lord Chiu hurriedly said, it wasn't suitable for them to make the announcement in Liang at the beginning. At first, it was in a small county 30 li away from Liang. After that, it was spread everywhere. However, no news was ever released in Liang. That's why we... Lord Chiu lowered his head as he spoke, but his mind was filled with calculations. Looking at the emperor's appearance, what was written on the announcement was probably true. Even though he did not know the truth behind the deaths of the two previous emperors, the fact that the emperor had abandoned the Chu capital and was unable to escape, and that he had joined forces with the northern tribes and Xiling to attack the Mo army after King Ding's manor had taken back the Chu capital was something that everyone in the world knew. The emperor was finished. Chapter 10:19. Trash. Pass down the order, bring the heads of Chu Xiaoying and those bastards back to see me. Mo Jingli roared angrily. Your Majesty. The attendant beside him said awkwardly, this. I'm afraid. Prince Ding left a group of 200 Qilin in Liang City. I'm afraid that our people in Liang. As the saying goes, blessings do not come in pairs and misfortunes do not come singly. Just when Mo Jingli thought that he was already unlucky enough, there were still more unlucky things waiting for him. The group of people did not even have time to heal Mo Jingli's injuries before they secretly headed towards Jiangnan. But they did not expect that in less than 2 days, another piece of news spread throughout the country. The Empress Dowager of Dechu State and the officials of Nanjing deposed Mo Jingli on the grounds that the emperor had murdered the 2 previous emperors and caused the deaths of millions of soldiers. They supported the previous emperor Mo Jingqi's son, Mo Suiyun, who was 14 years old, to become the emperor. They also announced that they would mend their relationship with the Prince Ding mansion and attack Xiling together. Without waiting for Mo Jingli to return, Mo Suiyun ascended the emperor with the support of the Empress Dowager and the officials. On the 2nd day of his ascension, he ordered an army of 300,000 soldiers to cross the Yunlan River and march toward Xiling. After receiving this news, Mo Jingli vomited blood on the spot and fainted. After he woke up, he screamed crazily and smashed everything in the room. This caused his already injured body to become even weaker. However, Mo Jingli was still unwilling to stop. Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao. I will definitely kill you. I will definitely kill you. Outside the door, Mo Jingli's high-pitched screams gradually became sharp and ear-piercing, causing the guards outside to tremble uncontrollably. In Lei Tingfeng's army in West Hill, Lei Tingfeng, who had been dealing with Murongxen and Marquis Nan these days, looked a little tired. After all, Marquis Nan and Murongxen were veterans who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Even though Lei Tingfeng had the upper hand in terms of military strength, he still did not gain much advantage in the confrontation with them. These days, both sides could only be considered to be in a stalemate, with both sides winning and losing. However, the situation was not as smooth as the father and son had expected. The Xiling army suffered heavy losses as soon as they arrived at Feihong Pass. Even Lei Jinting was seriously injured. This was definitely something that no one had expected. As a result, the morale of the West Hill troops surrounding the Feihong Pass was low. On the other hand, because of Mo Xiuyao's death, the Mahist army at Feihong Pass was dressed in mourning clothes and filled with killing intent. They were bent on avenging Prince Ding. Under such a contrast, even if the Xiling army was several times more powerful than the Mahist army, it was not so easy to take down the Feihong Pass in a short time. In the past 2 days, Murongxen and Marquis Nan, who had been provoking them almost every day, had disappeared. This made Lei Jinting, who had wanted to wipe them out in one fell swoop, feel as if he had punched cotton. And this sudden change made him faintly feel a trace of uneasiness and conspiracy. Greetings, Crown Prince. A general in military uniform hurried in. Lei Tingfeng's expression brightened. He sat up and said, "General Yang, why are you in such a hurry?" General Yang frowned and said, "Crown Prince, I just found out that Murongxen and Marquis Nan's troops suddenly retreated 30 miles last night and set up camp. It seems that they don't plan to fight with us these days." Lei Tingfeng frowned. Don't plan to fight. Do they have any tricks up their sleeves? No wonder Lei Tingfeng suspected. They might be able to escape for a while. Anyway, the task of their troops was to kill Marquis Nan and Murongxen here. But the other side absolutely did not have the time. After all, the Feihong Pass was still surrounded by hundreds of thousands of Xiling army. And behind the Feihong Pass was the headquarters of the Mahist army. Murongxen and Marquis Nan could not afford to gamble. General Yang frowned and hesitated for a moment before saying, "I think Marquis Nan and Murongxen are no longer in the army at this time." "What did you say?" Lei Tingfeng suddenly got up and said in a low voice, "Did they rush back to the Feihong Pass?" "That's impossible. Even if they are escorted by Qi Lin, we have blocked all the roads to the Feihong Pass. They can't go back without alerting us." In order to trap Marquis Nan and Murongxen outside the Feihong Pass, Lei Tingfeng spent a lot of effort. Without these 2 strong generals in their prime, at this time in the Feihong Pass, except for Yi Li and Feng Zhiyao, the most capable fighter was the old General Yuan Pei, who was in his 70s. General Yang was silent for a moment and said, "But I have sent people to investigate. At least 50% sure that these two people are really not in the army. If Murong-shen and Marquis Nan were afraid of one of them, the Mahist army would never retreat so far to set up camp." It was obvious that they did not want to fight with them for the time being. Lei Tingfeng frowned anxiously. If they didn't return to the Feihong Pass and are not in the army, where did they go? No, send people to investigate first. What if this is a trap they designed in advance? Yes, I will do as you say. General Yang saluted. Young Prince. Young Prince, something bad has happened. There was a sound of hurried footsteps outside the tent. Lei Tingfeng frowned unhappily and said, "Come in and talk." The person outside the door hurriedly came in and said while panting, "Young Prince, there is a large army coming toward us from the direction of Liang. According to the estimate of the scouts in front, there are at least 700,000 to 800,000 people." What? Mo Jingli was defeated. General Yang was shocked. Lei Tingfeng looked dignified. "No, where did the Mahist army get 700,000 to 800,000 people? Even if Leng Huai and Lu Jinxian's men were not damaged, they were not enough to fight 800,000 people. What's more, after fighting for so long, how could they not be damaged? How could they not be left to guard?" Moreover, the Mahist army had always strictly prohibited conscription on the battlefield. It was impossible for the Mahist army to have so many people. Who is leading the army? Lei Tingfeng asked. It's Mo Xiuyao. The scouts in front said that they saw the flag of the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 10:20. Mo Xiuyao. Lei Tingfeng suddenly turned around and accidentally kicked the incense burner beside his feet. He stared fiercely at the soldier who came to report and asked, "Are you sure it is Mo Xiuyao?" The soldier looked at the crown prince who had lost his composure. He only heard it from the scout who came back. How could he be sure? After thinking for a while, he said, "The scout is sure that he saw the Mahist army's flag." The black-silver python flag of the Mahist army was only flown when Prince Ding was personally leading the army. Lei Tingfeng calmed down and said, "Let the scout in. I want to ask him personally." Yes. Very quickly, the scout who was eavesdropping on the situation outside walked in and bowed to Lei Tingfeng. "This subordinate greets the crown prince." Lei Tingfeng waved his hand and said hurriedly, "Don't worry about this. You said that you saw 800,000 Mahist army coming in this direction." The scout nodded and said, "Your Highness, I am sure. 800,000 is more than enough. When I saw them, I was still 100 miles away. With their marching speed, when I rushed back, I am afraid that in at most 2 hours, their vanguard troops will meet with Murong-shen and Marquis Nan's troops." Lei Tingfeng asked in a low voice, "You saw the flag of the Prince Ding mansion?" "Yes, I'm definitely not mistaken. That's why I rushed back as soon as I saw Wang Qi." The scout nodded his head and said with certainty. Lei Tingfeng waved his hand and said, "I know. You can leave now." "Your Highness, I will leave." After the scout left, Lei Tingfeng fell into the chair absent-mindedly and murmured, "Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao is not dead." General Yang looked at Lei Tingfeng worriedly and said, "Your Highness. Your Highness, should we inform the prince first? I am afraid that the prince does not know yet. They only got the news when the Mahist army was approaching. It showed that Prince Ding's whereabouts were hidden, and once he took action, he acted quickly. She was afraid that His Highness was still in the dark." After being reminded by General Yang, Lei Tingfeng immediately came back to his senses and said, "Yes, quickly. You can send someone to deliver all the news here to Imperial Father as fast as possible." Lei Tingfeng took a deep breath and said, "We will block the Mahist army first, at least give my father time to recover." General Yang frowned and said, "Your Highness. You can't. Right now, Prince Ding's army is several times more than ours. Once he joins forces with Murong-shen and the others, Prince Ding's army will reach more than 1 million. At that time, there would be no need to fight. Prince Ding could crush them with numbers alone." After thinking for a while, General Yang said, "I am willing to stay and block Prince Ding." "Your Highness, please go to the prince's army immediately." "No." Lei Tingfeng flatly refused. Even if he was no match for Mo Xiuyao, he would never retreat without a fight. General Yang said anxiously, "Your Highness, please reconsider. Against Prince Ding, whether it is this general alone or this general and heir apparent, there would not be any difference. Your Highness, why do you have to make such an unnecessary sacrifice? As long as Prince and Your Highness are still there, the West Hill will still have a chance to turn defeat into victory." General Yang. Lei Tingfeng sighed in a low voice. Lei Tingfeng was the Prince of Jinan Palace. If there were no accidents, he would be the ruler of the West Hill in the future. How could he not understand what it meant to give up? However, with his personality, it was extremely difficult for him to abandon his soldiers and run away on the battlefield. General Yang said resolutely, "Your Highness, there is not much time. I am not sure how long I can block Prince Ding. Your Highness, please leave as soon as possible." Lei Tingfeng closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He bowed deeply to General Yang and said, "Lei Tingfeng is sorry, General. Please accept my bow." Both of them knew that in the past few years, whether it was the generals of the West Hill or the northern tribes, none of them had a good ending in Mo Xiuyao's hands. If General Yang chose to stay, he would definitely be killed. General Yang quickly supported Lei Tingfeng and said, "Your Highness, you are too serious. As a general of the West Hill, it is my duty to sacrifice myself for the country. Besides, to be able to fight Prince Ding, even if I die in battle, my life will not be in vain. Your Highness, please leave." It wasn't a glorious thing to run away before even seeing the face of the opponent. But the lessons he had learned over the years also told Lei Tingfeng that if he did not leave now, he would not be able to. More importantly, Lei Tingfeng had the courage to sacrifice himself for the country, but he could not abandon Jinan Palace for a moment of bravery. Lei Tingfeng did not see any bloodshed in this battle, but it was destined to be a nightmare for him for the rest of his life. On the mountain road not far from the West Hill military camp, Lei Tingfeng looked back at the quiet military camp. Finally, he turned back and waved his horsewhip, saying in a deep voice, "Let's go." The guards and soldiers behind Lei Tingfeng silently followed the Crown Prince. They did not know why the Crown Prince suddenly left the military camp, but as subordinates and soldiers, they did not have the right to say anything. All they could do was to obey. Lei Tingfeng and his men rode as fast as they could. The journey of a few hundred miles took only 4 o'clock in the morning of the next day. Lei Tingfeng's sudden arrival also surprised Lei Jinting. He knew that something big must have happened. Otherwise, with Lei Tingfeng's character, he would not leave his military camp so easily. He hurriedly got up and went out to meet Lei Tingfeng. He was covered in dust and his eyes were red. It was obvious that he was very tired. "Tingfeng, what happened?" Lei Jinting frowned and asked. Seeing Lei Jinting, Lei Tingfeng hurriedly got up and walked forward unsteadily. He grabbed Lei Jinting and said, "Father." Mo Xiuyao, Lei Jinting's heart sank. He held Lei Tingfeng down and said sternly, "Tingfeng, calm down. Speak slowly." Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Jinting and took a deep breath. He said hoarsely, "Father. Mo Xiuyao is still alive." Lei Jinting was shocked, but he did not lose his composure. From the moment Lei Tingfing mentioned Mo Xiuyao, Lei Jinting had already expected something. Lei Jinting looked at Lei Tingfing calmly and asked, Mo Xiuyao is not dead, so you came back. Perhaps Lei Jinting's calmness affected Lei Tingfing. Lei Tingfing also slowly calmed down. Lei Tingfing closed his eyes. The corners of his eyes twitched slightly. He said, Mo Xiuyao brought at least 800,000 soldiers from Liang. In addition to Murongshen and Marquis Nan's troops. Father, behind us, there are at least 1,000,000 Mahist army. Lei Jinting sighed softly. He patted Lei Tingfing's shoulder and said, Father knows. You did the right thing. The Xiling army could be abandoned. General Yang could die. Even Lei Jinting could die. But Lei Tingfing could not. He was already old. Lei Tingfing was the hope of West Hill's future. Lei Tingfing looked at Lei Jinting guiltily. He understood the reason, but he could not help but feel guilty for his own incompetence. If he had the ability to resist Mo Xiuyao, so what if Mo Xiuyao came back from the dead? Chapter 10:21. Seeing that Lei Tingfing had calmed down, Lei Jinting walked to the side and sat down. Mo Xiuyao's sudden revival was quite a shock to him, and he had no choice but to reconsider everything. Mo Xiuyao definitely would not have faked his death for no reason, and even gave up the advantage that the Mahist army had gained in the early stages. At this point, Lei Jinting was naturally able to discern a trace of the truth. If the war continued according to the original situation, it would take at least 3 to 5 years before a victor could be decided. Now it seemed that Mo Xiuyao's act of faking his death was obviously to quickly resolve this stalemate. And it was obviously very effective, at least. Mo Jingli had most likely already been dealt with by him. Otherwise, the Mahist army would not have been able to cross Liang so quickly. And that army of close to 1,000,000, that was definitely Mo Jingli's original army. Mo Jingli, that trash. I really overestimated him. Lei Jinting said in a low voice. Father, Mo Jingli was never Mo Xiuyao's opponent. Lei Tingfing frowned. Lei Jinting laughed coldly, opponent. If I guessed correctly, that trash was crippled by Mo Xiuyao before he could even exchange blows with Mo Xiuyao. Otherwise, where do you think Mo Xiuyao's hundreds of thousands of soldiers came from? Mo Xiuyao is not a god, and the north has been in chaos for years, and the population is already sparse. How did he create an army of 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers in such a short time? An army was not something that could be formed as long as it was a person. Furthermore, it had to be a young and strong man who had undergone some basic training. Otherwise, with so many people on the battlefield, once chaos broke out, they would be trampled to death without killing their own people. Father, you mean to say that Mo Xiuyao's 800,000 soldiers were seized from Mo Jingli's hands? Lei Tingfing asked in shock. Lei Jinting laughed coldly. Is there any other possibility? You just said. Murongshen and Marquis Nan are not in the army. Lei Tingfing nodded. Although he did not fully understand this matter, Lei Tingfing still felt that something was wrong when he linked it to Mo Xiuyao's sudden appearance. Then, he reported everything to Lei Jinting without missing a single detail. Lei Jinting frowned. Not to mention Lei Tingfing, even he himself could not understand where Marquis Nan and Murongshin could have gone instead of waiting to meet up with Mo Xiuyao and return to Feihong Pass together. Since he could not figure it out, he could only put it aside for the time being. After Lei Jinting instructed his generals and aides to pay attention to Mo Xiuyao and Mo Jingli's movements in southern Chu, he turned his gaze back to Feihong Pass. At this point, with Mo Xiuyao's speed, it was already too late for them to retreat. Moreover, if they retreated with their tails between their legs, where would the West Hill put its face? If Mo Xiuyao continued to pursue them, it would be even worse for the West Hill. In addition, Enchanting had a vague premonition that this time would be the last time he fought with the Mahist army. At Feihong Pass, the Mahist army was still dressed in mourning, waiting for battle. At the foot of Feihong Pass, the Shilling army was similarly imposing, eyeing covetously. On the city gate tower, Yi Li and old General Yuan Pei stood side by side. Beside them stood Feng Zhiyao, Leng Haoyu, Han Mingyue, Qin Feng, and the others. General Yuan Pei chuckled and said, "It seems that Enchanting is determined to take Feihong Pass. Looking at this situation, he will not retreat until he takes Feihong Pass." Feng Zhiyao frowned and said, "Did Enchanting take the wrong medicine? His injuries haven't healed yet, have they?" Yi Li nodded and said indifferently, "His injuries won't heal without 2 or 3 months. Look over there." Han Mingyue, who was standing on the side, raised his hand and pointed. Everyone looked in the direction he pointed. At the back of the army, where the flag was fluttering, stood a tall man in armor. Feng Zhiyao frowned and said, "That is Enchanting. Why is he here? Shouldn't he be with General Murong and the others? Could it be?" Yi Li said firmly, "No, Enchanting alone can't deal with Marquis Nan and General Murong. Enchanting's face doesn't look good. Something must have happened over there." Han Mingyue raised his eyebrows and said, "Princess is so confident? If so, why haven't General Murong and Marquis Nan come back yet?" Yi Li frowned and shook his head, I don't know." Han Mingxi rubbed his forehead and groaned. He pointed below and said, "I say, we should be worried about the people below. More than 600,000 soldiers, they can even smash Feihong Pass with stones, can't they?" Yuan Pei glanced at Han Mingxi with dissatisfaction and said, "Kid Han, what are you talking about? As long as I am still alive, Feihong Pass will not be broken. Then you must live a long, long life." Han Mingxi's lips curled into a smile. The people on the city tower were talking happily, but the West Hill generals below were not in a good mood. Especially when they saw the large number of white clothes. Originally, they were bleak and heavy in the eyes of the West Hill people. Now, in the eyes of the West Hill people, they were clearly mocking them. A hot-tempered West Hill general took the lead and rushed out. He pointed his spear at the city tower and shouted, "People of the Mahist army, come down and accept your death." On the city tower, Feng Zhiyao curled his lips and said, "It seems that the West Hill people have taken the wrong medicine today. Well, I will come and meet you." Feng Zhiyao supported himself on the city wall with his right hand. A flamboyant red robe directly floated down from the city tower. On the battlefield, Feng Zhiyao also put away his usual folding fan. He unfolded the long sword in his hand and stabbed toward the general. The general was also a famous fierce general in the West Hill army. He had a deep hatred with the Mahist army. His family was among the people that Mo Xiuyao killed in the Emperor of Shilling. At this time, seeing Feng Zhiyao rushing over, he also raised his spear and stabbed at Feng Zhiyao without dodging. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged 7 or 8 moves. No one had the upper hand. Feng Zhiyao's thin lips slightly curved and whispered, "It's a bit interesting. I want to see what ability you have to dare to ask the Mahist army to accept your death." "Princess, something is wrong." Yuan Pei, who was suddenly watching the battle, narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Quickly call Feng San back." Unfortunately, it was too late. Before Yuan Pei's voice died away, the West Hill army had already shot thousands of arrows in the direction of Feng Zhiyao. The people on the tower couldn't help but exclaim, "Feng San." In the face of such a sudden change, Feng Zhiyao was shocked but not panicked. He swooped forward and landed on the horse of the West Hill general who wanted to take the opportunity to withdraw from the battlefield. The West Hill general turned over and wanted to knock Feng Zhiyao off his horse. However, he didn't expect to feel a chill on his neck and fall off the horse himself. After Feng Zhiyao killed the West Hill general, he didn't dare to stay for a moment. He flew in the direction of the city tower. Finally, at the last moment when the arrows hit him, he fell into a circle of barriers in front of the city gate and avoided a disaster. Lying on the ground, Feng Zhiyao gasped for breath and sweated profusely. Just now, he had clearly felt the arrow piercing through his head. To be able to dodge this sudden attack, it was really a stroke of good fortune. Just as Feng Zhiyao was gasping for breath and secretly cursing Lei Jinting for being despicable, the two armies had already started fighting. Soon, the city gate opened and countless Mahist army soldiers rushed out of the gate. The Shilling army had too many people. If they didn't go out of the city to resist the enemy, once Lei Jinting went all out and persevered to climb the city wall, the Feihong Pass would fall sooner or later. The best way was to prevent the Shilling army from approaching the city tower of the Feihong Pass. However, this would cause too much damage to the Mahist army. It was unknown how long they could hold on. But now, there was nothing they could do but defend to the death. Chapter 1022. As soon as the Mahist army left the city, they were quickly besieged by the Shilling army. There were less than 100,000 soldiers and horses out of the city. Compared to the Shilling army of more than 600,000, the difference was too big. Although the Mahist army was incomparably valiant, they did not have much chance of winning in such a sea of people tactic. However, under such circumstances, a group of people from the Shilling army suddenly appeared in the chaos. These people were all dressed in yellow. Compared to the ordinary Shilling soldiers, they were more fierce and valiant. In a one-on-one situation, they were even more powerful than the Mahist army soldiers. They had just joined for a while, and many Mahist army soldiers had died tragically. Although it was not enough to shake the defense line built by the Mahist army soldiers with flesh and blood, the outcome was expected after a long time. "It's the gold-clad guards," Leng Haoyu said in a deep voice. Like the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion and the royal family of Dechu state, Lei Jinting's troops were called the gold-clad guards. Lei Jinting had even taken out his private guards, which could be said to be his hidden trump card. Everyone could feel not only Lei Jinting's determination to break through Feihong Pass, but also a hidden impatience. "Qin Feng, how many people did Qi Lin bring?" Yili asked in a deep voice. Qin Feng said, 3 teams stayed in Li City, 2 teams followed General Liu, 1 team followed General Zhang, and the remaining 6 teams were at Feihong Pass. Over the years, Qi Lin's members had about 3,000 people, divided into 12 teams. This time, understanding that it was not easy to guard Feihong Pass, Qin Feng transferred all the idle Qi Lin to Feihong Pass in case of emergency. Yili nodded and said, "Very good. 4 teams stop the gold-clad guards, and the remaining 2 teams, kill them." This subordinate obeys. Qin Feng's expression was solemn as he bowed to Yili. Then, he turned around and went down the city gate tower to mobilize his men. Amidst the chaos, a group of men in black appeared on the battlefield. Less than 1,000 men and horses did not stand out among the Mahist army, which was also dressed in black. But when they rushed into the middle of the enemy, they made people feel their terrifying attack power. The Mo family soldiers, who were originally in a precarious situation with the golden-robed guards, were separated. The golden-robed guards that the Mo family soldiers had been struggling to fend off seemed to be unable to withstand a single blow from the Mo family soldiers. Their martial arts might not be higher than the gold-robed guards, but their methods were clearly more effective than the gold-robed guards. They also knew how to cooperate better than the arrogant gold-robed guards. But even so, they did not panic at all. It was as if they only had one goal in their eyes. They kept moving forward, "Princess, we can't kill Lei Jinting. Let them retreat." On the city tower, Leng Haoyu looked at the countless dark yellow figures in the distance and said anxiously. Yili closed her eyes and did not answer. Beside her, Qin Feng whispered, "They can't retreat, and they won't retreat." Because these two groups of Qilin, which only had 500 to 600 people, almost a third of the West Hills soldiers on the battlefield had retreated. Genom of Gojosian was more important to the Xiling army than Mo Xiuyao was to the Mahist army. But now Genom of Gojosian was too weak to withstand the slightest accident. They did not need to kill Lei Jinting. As long as they acted like they wanted to kill Lei Jinting at all costs, it was enough to make the Xiling army nervous. However, these Qilins were destined to become the sacrificial lambs of this battle. Chapter 10:23. I'll bring people to save them. Leng Haoyu said anxiously. Yili turned her head and looked at him indifferently. Save them? For 500 people, another 50,000 people will be sacrificed. Leng Haoyu was speechless. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart, but more than that, he was ashamed and guilty. Qilin was built and trained by Yili herself. Although Princess Ding could command the entire Mahist army, Yili had always been very careful and rarely interfered with the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. Qilin could be said to be personally created by Ding Wangfei and was her most loyal personal guard. If it wasn't because she had no other choice, with Wang Fei's personality, why would she send these people out knowing they would die? In war, a general was destined to bear a burden that ordinary people could not bear. Her every word and action could determine the life and death of thousands of soldiers. At this time, the choice became very important. The choice was very likely to affect the outcome of this war and even the rise and fall of a country. That was why there was a saying, the merciful cannot command soldiers, and the righteous cannot manage finances. Yili, on the other hand, had already become a qualified commander. Such a choice might be cold, but there was no other choice. Princess Ding is righteous. Old General Yuan Pei looked at the black figures in the distance that were drowned by the Xiling army and said in a low voice. Yili's lips curved into a faint smile and sighed softly, a general's success is built on the bones of thousands. A drop of transparent liquid quietly fell from the corner of her beautiful eyes and disappeared in a moment. A general's success is built on the bones of thousands. Leng Haoyu murmured softly. Suddenly, he roared and jumped down from the top of the city wall and rushed into the chaos. Kill! Defend Feihong Pass to the death! On the city wall, a few more figures quickly jumped down and joined the chaos. On the city wall, only Yuan Pei, Yili, and Zhuo Jing were left. The 500 Qilin were quickly drowned in the hundreds of thousands of Xiling army and disappeared. The black-clothed Qilin who were originally fighting with the gold-robed guards let out a sharp whistle. When the last gold-robed guard was killed, all the Qilin gave a Qilin military salute to Yili who was on the city wall. Then, they all rushed in the direction where the 500 Qilin disappeared. The mission that their comrades could not complete, they would continue. On the battlefield, a black arrow that was even larger than the previous one shot towards the rear of the West Hill army at lightning speed. Seeing their actions, someone from the Mahist army and suddenly shouted, "Black Cloud Cavalry! Open the way for the brothers of Qilin! Mahist army! Go!" Countless cavalrymen and infantrymen in white started to rush into the Xiling army. The Black Cloud Cavalry's armored cavalry charged into the army like a white tornado, opening up a path for the Qilin following behind them. The Mahist army infantrymen who were following behind immediately rushed up and fought with the West Hill soldiers who were in a mess. At this moment, it was no longer just defending the city. Originally, attacking was the best defense. However, the difference in numbers between the Mahist army and the West Hill army was too big, so they could only defend. However, when everyone was in a killing frenzy, no one cared about whether they were defending or attacking. There was only one thing in their eyes: to die with the enemy. If I can't live, you will die with me. At this moment, people who were standing far away would see a strange scene. The Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry protected a small group of Black Qilin as they rushed forward in the Shieling army. They were heading straight for the commander's flag and the king's flag at the back of the Shieling army. They were invincible. No one cared about the increasing number of Shieling army behind them, and no one cared that it was getting harder and harder to move forward. As long as they were still breathing, they would keep moving forward. These guys are crazy. At the back of the Shieling army, Lei Tingfeng angrily looked at the chaotic battlefield in front of him. Who would have thought that in such a face-to-face confrontation, the momentum of the Shieling army of hundreds of thousands would be suppressed by the Mahist army of less than 200,000? No matter what, the West Hill had lost today's battle. When it came to morale, one side was strong and the other was weak. Once the momentum was suppressed, the Shieling army would not be able to break through Feihong Pass no matter what. Lei Jinting sighed slightly and said in a low voice, "Mahist army. Black Cloud cavalry. Qilin, they are indeed famous in the world. Father, you should retreat first." Lei Tingfeng said worriedly. Lei Jinting shook his head. "No, this time we must eliminate Qilin and the Black Cloud cavalry. Beat the drums." Lei Tingfeng had no choice but to order the beating of the drums. The earth-shattering sound of the drums sounded on the battlefield. The soldiers of the West Hill were all shocked. The sudden crazy attack of the Mahist army just now had made them panic for a moment and even lost their formation. At this moment, they came to their senses and immediately rushed to fight with the Mahist army again. On the tower of Feihong Pass, Yi Li stood in front of a huge war drum that was much taller than her. He picked up the two drumsticks that were placed beside him and hit them heavily. Dong! 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 The sound of the war drum became more and more frequent and soon covered the sound of the Shieling army's war drum. Many people hurriedly looked back and saw a slender woman dressed in white on the tall city gate tower in the distance. Yi Li nodded and said, "That's good. You stay here. I'll go in and take a look." This was an extremely inconspicuous small courtyard. It was originally for the soldiers stationed at Feihong Pass. Now, the people living here were Qilin survivors who had just retreated from the battlefield. Entering the small courtyard, they saw many people lying under the eaves in the courtyard. Many people did not even have time to change their clothes. They just casually bandaged their wounds and sat on the ground to sleep. Shen Yang was directing his men to bandage the wounds of the people. The Mahist army also suffered heavy casualties. All the military doctors went to take care of them. Shen Yang came here personally. Seeing Yi Li come in, Shen Yang quickly got up and bowed. Yi Li shook her head, indicating that he did not need to be so polite. Shen Yang then turned around and continued to bandage a wounded soldier in front of him. Not wanting to disturb the rest of these wounded soldiers, Yi Li and Shen Yang went to the inner room to talk. Yi Li asked, "Mr. Shen, are their injuries serious?" Shen Yang shook his head and said, "Only a few of them are seriously injured. I'm afraid they won't be able to fully recover in the future. The others are fine. They will be fine after a few days of rest." Yi Li breathed a sigh of relief and nodded, "Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Shen. If you need anything, Mr. Shen can just send someone to tell Zhuijing." Shen Yang nodded solemnly and said, "Princess, don't worry. This old man promises that their injuries will be fine. These people are real indomitable men." Although Shen Yang did not personally go to the battlefield, he still knew what happened on the battlefield. For these soldiers who risked their lives, even as a doctor, Shen Yang could not help but admire them. "How are Lin Han and the others?" Yi Li asked again. When the soldiers were retreating, she saw Lin Han being carried back. His injuries were definitely not serious. Shen Yang sighed and said, Wei Lin and Qin Feng are both lightly injured, but Lin Han's injuries are very serious. This subordinate suggests that after he wakes up, he should be moved to a quiet place to recuperate. There shouldn't be any big problems in the future. But his martial arts. I'm afraid. Yili was silent for a while, then nodded and said, I understand. Mr. Shen, please arrange it. Mr. Shen, please take good care of them. This consort still has something to do, so I'll leave first. Shen Yang looked at Yili and sighed. This subordinate sees that princess's complexion is not very good. Please take care of yourself. These things are not princess's fault. Yili smiled faintly, but there was a trace of indescribable bitterness in her smile. She nodded slightly and said, Thank you, Mr. Shen. Looking at Yili's back, Shen Yang sighed helplessly and shook his head. He turned and continued to busy himself. With such a heavy pressure, not to mention a woman, even a man might not be able to bear it. In fact, Princess was only a woman in her 20s. If she had not married into Ding Wangfu, she might just be a gentle and elegant young married woman who lived like a princess. Now, she had to bear the burden of hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Feihong Pass and the rise and fall of the entire Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion. For a woman, was such a life really good? Yili returned to the general's mansion. She waved the people around her away and sat down alone in the study. She stared at the scroll in front of her and closed her eyes slightly. A drop of crystal-clear tear fell from the corner of her eye and dripped onto the scroll full of words and quickly disappeared. Yili quickly reached out and wiped away the water stain on the scroll. She added a new word next to her blurry name. This was the name list of all the soldiers in Qilin. But now, most of them were no longer there. Yili would never forget that they did not really die for the sake of carrying out the mission. From the beginning, it was destined to be a mission that could not be completed. From the beginning, those people were cannon fodder that she abandoned. As a commander, she knew that what she did was right. But as a soldier, she could never forgive herself. Those people that she abandoned did not even know that they were destined to be cannon fodder from the beginning. After a long silence, Yili took a blank rice paper from the side. She picked up the pen and began to transcribe the names on the name list again, word by word. Only those names that were marked with black marks represented death. The atmosphere in the big tent of the West Hill military camp was heavy. The generals looked at the empty seats around them and only felt a chill in their hearts. The comrades who had been excitedly discussing the war this morning were all living people, regardless of whether they had good relationships with each other or had conflicts with each other. But now, half of the people in the big tent were gone. And the cause of all this was only because of 1,000 people in Qilin. Chapter 1025. They are not human. They are demons. A young general murmured with a pale face. The others were not necessarily calmer than him. Everyone sat there in a daze as if they had lost their souls. Enough. Enchanting looked coldly at the generals in front of him and sighed deeply. More than 1,000 Qilin, less than 1/3 of the Shilling army's troops and horses, had beaten hundreds of thousands of Shilling army into a daze. In a short period of time, the West Hill army would be restrained when facing the Mahist army. Prince. A general stood up and hesitated. Prince, I'm afraid we won't be able to break through Feihong Pass for a while. Mo Xiaoyao has brought hundreds of thousands of troops and is about to rush over. Should we retreat first? Enchanting sneered and asked, Retreat? Can we still retreat now? They had advanced all the way and were too deep into the north. It was already too late to retreat now. At that time, they would only be caught off guard by Mo Xiuyao midway. The general who spoke also turned pale. Mo Xiuyao's troops were behind them. They had no other way except to break through Feihong Pass and return to West Hill through the northwest. But Feihong Pass in front of them was not so easy to break through. Lei Jinting sighed and said, "Today, the Mahist army has lost more than half of its men and horses. Now, the Mahist army at Feihong Pass will not exceed 100,000 at most. But if they still have Qilin." Someone whispered. No one knew how many Qilin the Mahist army had. Over the years, their shadows seemed to be in many places, but no one had really caught their tracks. Many people were very curious about this troop. This time, they finally saw it for themselves. However, it brought them endless nightmares. No more. At this point, neither side will hold back. In today's battle, Yili must have done her best, Lei Jinting said solemnly. Lei Tingfeng asked, "Father, do you mean, we can take Feihong Pass as long as we fight another big battle? But our troops?" The Xiling army was not defeated by the Mahist army, but the morale and soul of the Xiling soldiers were crushed by the Mahist army. In a short period of time, he would only be able to display less than half of his abilities on the battlefield. Lei Jinting waved his hand and said, "I have my own plans." Reporting. There's an urgent report from the front. Someone rushed in from outside the tent and reported in a loud voice. Come in. A man dressed in military attire came in quickly and presented a secret letter. Lei Jinting opened it and his expression changed slightly. He quickly calmed down and said, "Everyone, go and rest. Reorganize the troops. I'll take my leave." "Father, what happened?" Only the father and son were left in the tent. Lei Tingfeng asked without hesitation. When his father read the secret letter, Lei Tingfeng clearly saw his hand tremble. Something big must have happened. Lei Jinting fell back into the chair. His face was pale and a trace of blood seeped through his clothes. Lei Jinting's yellow battle robe was dyed red. "Father." After a long time, Lei Jinting looked up at Lei Tingfeng and said, "Tingfeng, take Fengli, Zhang Yi and Sheng Wanqing and leave the north. Go back to Xiling." "What?" Lei Tingfeng was stunned. He couldn't understand Lei Jinting's sudden order. Puzzled, he picked up the letter Lei Jinting had placed on the table and read it. Lei Tingfeng's expression was even uglier than Lei Jinting's. Southern Chu deposed Mo Jingli and formed an alliance with the Prince Ding mansion. How is that possible? Lei Jinting smiled bitterly. What's impossible about that? There are no eternal enemies in this world. Besides, to the people of Southern Chu, compared to the Prince Ding mansion, we are their true enemy. In this world, there weren't many people who thought the same as Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli. Lei Tingfeng looked at the contents of the secret letter. The 800,000 Chu army has pledged allegiance to the Prince Ding mansion. The 300,000 Chu army has crossed the Yunlan River. I never understood where Murongshen and the Marquis of Nan had suddenly left the battlefield to go. Only now do I understand, they went to Southern Chu. Lei Jinting sighed deeply, somewhat dejectedly. Murongshen and the Marquis of Nan were famous generals of the Dechu state. With them leading the 300,000 troops sent by Southern Chu, there was naturally no problem. However, he didn't know what benefits Mo Xiuyao had given the Southern Chu court to make them so determined to depose Mo Jingli and send troops to support the Prince Ding mansion. "Father, let's go together," Lei Tingfeng said. Lei Tingfeng already understood the current situation. Once Mo Xiuyao's million-man army arrived, even if his father had the power to reach the heavens, he wouldn't be able to escape. Lei Jinting shook his head indifferently. "If I don't go, I won't be able to go. Tingfeng, take the 3 generals with you and leave tonight. Other than your personal bodyguards, don't take any soldiers." Regardless of age or ability, Generals Feng, Zhang, and Shengguan are the people with the most potential in the Western Tomb. As long as you can suppress them, the Western Tomb won't be at the end of its rope. After you return, do you know what to do? He was seriously injured and couldn't travel long distances. Moreover, things had already come to this. How could he face the people of the Western Tomb? Rather than drag out an ignoble existence, it was better to die a worthy death. No, father. Lei Tingfeng said anxiously. Father, your son begs you. Your son's ability is insufficient. I can't shoulder the rise and fall of the Western Tomb. Tingfeng is willing to stay behind and bring up the rear. Father, please take the generals and leave first. Tingfeng. Lei Zhenting said sternly. Remember this, from now on, the Western Tomb is handed over to you. Yi Li, a woman, can shoulder the responsibility of an entire Mahist army. Are you trying to tell I that you can't even compare to a woman? Father, Lei Zhenting closed his eyes and raised his hand to pat Lei Tingfeng's shoulder. It's all my fault for restricting you too much in the past. You have to rely on yourself in the future. Remember, don't fight head-on with the Mahist army. Protect the Western Tomb first. One day, you will rise again. These words sounded more like his last words to Lei Tingfeng. In fact, Lei Tingfeng also understood that if he left today, it would indeed be the last time his father scolded him. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Father, your son understands. Lei Zhenting patted him heavily and turned around, no longer looking at him. Let's go. Take my token and tell those people to leave with you immediately. Don't stay for even a moment. Your son obeys. Father, take care. Lei Tingfeng's eyes were red. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times. He got up and took one last look at Lei Zhenting's old and bleak back. Then he left resolutely. Tingfeng, if you meet Ling Taihan on the way, tell him. I'm waiting for him at Feihong Pass. Lei Tingfeng nodded silently. He lifted the curtain and walked out. Chapter 1026. This subordinate greets Wang Fei. In the study of Feihong Pass, a man in black knelt on one knee in front of the desk and said in a deep voice. Yi Li looked at him indifferently and asked, "Where is Prince?" The man in black reported, "Prince has led 1,000,000 troops and is approaching Feihong Pass. They will reach Feihong Pass in 2 days at most." Yi Li nodded. "Does Prince have any other orders?" The man in black took out a letter from his sleeve and presented it, saying, "This is what Prince ordered this subordinate to present to Wang Fei." Yi Li took the letter and read it quickly. She calmly nodded and said, "I know. You can go." The man in black looked at the indifferent Yi Li in front of him and hesitated. As Mo Xiuyao's trusted shadow guard, he intuitively felt that something was wrong with Wang Fei, but he couldn't see what the problem was. He could only respectfully leave. "Wang Fei, take care. This subordinate will leave." In the study, it quickly became quiet again. Yi Li looked at the letter in front of her and slightly lowered her eyes. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Xiao Yao, have you thought about, what if Feihong Pass is breached?" Wang Fei. Outside the door, Feng Zhiyao said in a deep voice. "Come in." Feng Zhiyao came in and looked at Yi Li. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Wang Fei, Prince, is he coming back?" Yi Li nodded and said with a faint smile, "Yes, he will be back in 2 or 3 days at most." Feng Zhiyao's face was happy, but Yi Li's expression was still indifferent. He said with some confusion, "Wang Fei, Xiao Yao is coming back. Are you not happy?" Yi Li looked up at him and asked, "Feng San, can we hold on until Xiao Yao comes back?" Feng Zhiyao was stunned. Wang Fei means. Yi Li sighed softly, 1,000,000 troops, how can Lei Jinting not know? Tomorrow. I'm afraid the Shilling army's attack will be even more intense. Feng Zhiyao frowned. Will Lei Jinting attack the city tomorrow? Yili said with a faint smile, if he can't take Feihong Pass before the army arrives, he will die. If it's you, will you fight or not? Feng Zhiyao's expression gradually became serious as he asked, what plans does your highness have? Yili reached out and handed over the letter in her hand. Feng Zhiyao took the letter and read it. He frowned and looked at Yili. Prince asked Wang Fei to leave Feihong Pass first. Wang Fei seems to. Yili didn't have the slightest intention to leave. Feng Zhiyao persuaded, since Prince has already made arrangements, Wang Fei, should we leave first? Feng Zhiyao understood Mo Xiuyao's temper. If something happened to Princess Ding, everyone would have to bear the consequences. Yili looked at him faintly and said, leave. Where to? Naturally back to Glass City. Feng Zhiyao said, Prince will arrive soon. Wang Fei will be safe as long as you leave Feihong Pass. No matter how fast Lei Jinting is, he can't attack Glass City, right? Chapter 10:27. Seeing that Feng Zhiyao still wanted to say something, Yili waved her hand and said, there's no need to say any more. Unless you plan to go against your superior and knock me out. But if you really do that, I will come back on my own. Feng San, if I escape from this battle, I will not feel at peace for the rest of my life. Feng Zhiyao was silent for a while before he finally sighed and said, I understand. But Wang Fei, please take care of yourself. Yili smiled and said, of course, there are still people waiting for me to go back. Unable to persuade Yili, Feng Zhiyao could only leave helplessly. He was very clear that what Yili said was very likely to become reality. The current Lei Jinting had no hope of turning the tables. Even if they broke into Feihong Pass, when Mo Xiuyao's army arrived, they would still be quickly eliminated. Therefore, Lei Jinting was very likely to stake everything on one throw and wreak havoc in Feihong Pass. As the Mahist army, they could not watch as the mountains and rivers they protected turned into rivers of blood. Therefore, they could only choose to fight with the Shilling army to the last soldier. They had to delay as much time as possible so that Mo Xiuyao and his army could arrive on time. Princess Ding is not willing to leave. Under the moonlight, Han Mingyue looked handsome. The faint moonlight scattered on his body, adding a different kind of tranquility. Feng Zhiyao sighed and shrugged, didn't you already guess? Han Mingyue nodded and said, if Princess Ding is willing to leave at this time, she would not be Princess Ding. But Xiuyao, he really is not worried. Mo Xiuyao only sent a letter back. How could he be so sure that Yili would do as he said? Feng Zhiyao smiled bitterly and said, didn't Prince think that the little heir is still at Feihong Pass? Even if it's not for herself, Princess Consort will leave Feihong Pass for the little heir. Han Mingyue smiled and said, unfortunately, he doesn't know that Princess Ding will send the little heir away in advance. Isn't that so? Feng Zhiyao frowned worriedly. He looked at Han Mingyue and asked, why aren't you leaving? Han Mingyue smiled indifferently and said, I'm all alone in this world. Isn't it the same wherever I go? Tomorrow. I'll leave the princess's safety to you, Feng Zhiyao said solemnly. Han Mingyue raised her eyebrows and asked, do you trust me? Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and rolled his eyes at him, saying, if I don't trust you, why would I talk nonsense with you? Han Mingyue nodded solemnly and said, I trust you. Thank you. Princess Consort. In the study, Qin Feng and Lin Han stood in front of the desk and said in a low voice. Both of them were injured. Qin Feng's left shoulder was still wrapped in white cloth. Lin Han didn't have any external injuries, but his pale face showed that he wasn't completely unharmed. Yili put down her brush and looked at the two with a frown, saying, "Why aren't you going to rest?" Qin Feng said in a low voice, "This subordinate requests to accompany Princess Consort to battle tomorrow." Lin Han followed and said, "This subordinate also wishes to." "Nonsense." Yili coldly reprimanded, "If you're injured, then go and recover. Do you think that you have more lives than others, or that the world won't turn without you?" Qin Feng and Lin Han looked at each other. Qin Feng stepped forward and said, "This subordinate requests Princess Consort's permission. This is not only the request of the two of us, but also the request of the 100 or so Qi Lin brothers who have just returned." Yili sneered and asked, "And then? You drag your injured bodies to the battlefield, and then let Qi Lin be exterminated. The order was given by me. Even if you want to be buried with them, it's not your turn. This subordinate doesn't dare." Qin Feng and Lin Han hurriedly knelt down. Yili looked at the two quietly. After a while, she sighed faintly and said, "Get up. I understand how you feel, but I hope that you also understand. The Qi Lin brothers who have sacrificed themselves definitely don't want to see you die with them. Instead, they hope that you and all the other survivors can live well and live with them." Yili really understood how they felt. The relationship between the Qi Lin soldiers was deeper than that between the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. They were all elite selected from various armies. Almost all of them had experienced from the beginning that they didn't see eye to eye with each other. Later on, they slowly worked together. They went through hellish training together. They carried out all kinds of difficult missions together many times. It was true that they lived and died together. This time, they had sacrificed nearly 90% of their possessions. Those who survived would not feel the so-called feeling of surviving a calamity, nor would they feel as if they had escaped death. Most of them would only blame themselves for being alive. They would only feel guilty. Yili had seen a lot of examples like this. Many soldiers had experienced cruel battles. They didn't die under the enemy's swords and spears. In the end, they ended their own lives. Princess. Qin Feng and Lin Han's eyes were a little red. These Qi Lin soldiers were carefully selected and personally trained by them. For them, these soldiers were more like their brothers, students, and nephews. Seeing so many people die in front of them, but they couldn't do anything about it. This kind of pain was enough to make them doubt the meaning of their existence. Yili stood up and looked at the two seriously. "Go back and tell them that as long as I'm alive, I will personally bring Enchanting's head back to pay tribute to the dead soldiers. But I hope that they will all live well and continue Qi Lin." "We obey." Qin Feng and Lin Han stood up and said. After saying that, Qin Feng hesitated and said, "But I still want to follow you into battle. I'm not only the commander of Qi Lin, I'm also your bodyguard. As long as I haven't died in battle, I must stay by Princess' side and protect Princess' safety." This subordinate also has the same intention. This subordinate is a secret guard of Ding Palace. The purpose of a secret guard's existence is to protect Princess' safety. May Princess allow it? Yili looked at them awkwardly. Lin Han said, "Princess, don't worry. My injury is not a problem." Qin Feng nodded and said, "It's not a problem. It's just a flesh wound." The study was silent for a long time. Then Yili looked up and glanced at the two of them. "Since you know that there will be a tough battle tomorrow, go back and rest." "Yes, we will leave." The two of them were overjoyed. They quickly bowed to Yili and left. Sure enough, before the sun rose the next day, the sound of the Xiling army entering the palace could be heard from outside. Yili led Yuan Pei and the others to the city gate tower. Before the sun rose, they saw the Xiling army below the city gate in a black mass. They hadn't even started fighting yet, but they could already feel the overwhelming murderous aura and desire to fight. They didn't know what Lei Jinting had done. After yesterday's battle, the Shieling army's morale should have been low. But now, they were full of murderous aura. Shieling Genom of Gojoseon, Lei Jinting requests to see Princess Ding. Under the city gate tower, Lei Jinting didn't hide at the back of the army this time. Instead, he rode his horse and stood at the front. He looked up at the people on the city gate tower. Even the bodyguards he usually had with him were nowhere to be seen. It was as if Lei Jinting didn't care about his life at all. Even if the Mahist army on the city gate tower suddenly shot arrows at him, he didn't care. Chapter 1028. Yili was slightly startled. She took a step forward and revealed herself between the two battlements. She said lightly, "Yili is here. What does Genom of Gojoseon have to say to me?" Lei Jinting smiled faintly, "Nothing much. I just have some questions that I want to talk to Princess Ding alone. I originally wanted to talk to Prince Ding, but it seems that I won't have the chance now. Since things have come to this, does Genom of Gojoseon think that there is anything else to talk about?" Lei Jinting waved his hand indifferently, "I don't care. It's just that some things are uncomfortable if you don't talk about it." Yili frowned. Feng Zhiyao and the others beside her quickly advised, "Princess, don't talk nonsense with him." Yili knew that talking to Lei Jinting in private would not do any harm to the Mahist army. At least, it could delay for a while. No matter how long it would take, for the generals guarding Feihong Pass, the longer they delayed, the better it would be for them. Under the city wall, Lei Jinting looked at Yili and smiled, "If Princess is worried, I can enter the city alone to talk to Princess." "No need." Yili smiled faintly. She jumped down from the city wall and landed beside the city gate. She looked at Lei Jinting and said, "Genom of Gojoseon, if you have anything to say, you can come over and talk." The moment Yili landed, Xue Jing, Qin Feng, and Lin Han, who were beside Yili, also jumped down. They formed a triangle and blocked Yili behind them. On the city wall, the Black Cloud Cavalry's bows and arrows were aimed at the city wall. As long as Lei Jinting made any strange movements, regardless of whether he succeeded or not, the Black Cloud Cavalry's arrows would turn him into a porcupine. With Qin Feng and the others standing in front of Yili, the chances of Lei Jinting landing a hit were infinitely close to zero. Lei Jinting smiled calmly and urged his horse forward. "Prince, no." The generals behind Lei Jinting also tried to stop him. They were not the only ones who were worried about the Prince Ding mansion. Lei Jinting waved his sleeves, indicating that there was no need to say anything more. Then, he walked down the city gate tower alone. Lei Jinting stopped a few steps away from Yili. He did not mind the covetous eyes of Qin Feng and the others. After looking at Yili for a long time, he sighed regretfully and said, "I can be said to have wandered unhindered in my life and rarely met a worthy opponent. However, I always lost at the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. All these years, I have been thinking about why this is so. I have also been thinking of ways to defeat Mo Xiuyao. But now, it is clear that I have failed." Yili was indifferent and did not speak. She knew that Lei Jinting only wanted to say something and did not really want her to answer. As expected, Lei Jinting did not mind her silence and continued, "Now that we have reached this point, I finally understand. From the moment Xiling, the Chu State, and the Northern Militant Alliance formed, they had already fallen into Mo Xiuyao's trap. I boasted of my intelligence, but I also knew that I was far from being able to calculate to this extent. I think even young Master Qing Qin, who is the most intelligent person in the world, would not be able to scheme to this extent. Prince Ding, Mo Xiuyao, is truly outstandingly scheming. Wang Fei, don't you think so?" Yili smiled faintly and said, if Genom of Gojosian is like him, and one day suddenly falls from a high place to the dust, you will also be like him, suppressing and enduring all your feelings and pain. You will also have to face your enemies calmly. Perhaps, Genom of Gojosian will be able to understand why he is able to do all this. Not to mention Enchanting, even Yili was often shocked by Mo Xiaoyao's arrangements and schemes. If Mo Xiaoyao was not willing to speak, Yili believed that he definitely had the ability to keep everyone in the dark even after he ruled the world. Wang Fei is right. Enchanting had to admit that Yili was right. Enchanting was a true genius. In his life, other than the hatred of Mo Liufang's broken arm, he had not suffered any setbacks. Whatever he wanted to do, he was always able to do it. Except for matters related to the Prince Ding mansion. Enchanting looked at the calm Yili, his eyes filled with admiration and amazement. In the current situation, the Shilling army's ending was not worth mentioning. At least in front of him, the Shilling army definitely had the ability to break through Fei Hong Pass in 4 hours. Fei Hong Pass, the Mahist army stationed there, and even Yili's ending was almost foreseeable. Even in such a situation, to be able to remain so calm, even a man would not be able to do it. The woman in front of him was indeed worthy of the respect and admiration of all the men in the world. I originally thought that Wang Fei would leave Fei Hong Pass last night. Enchanting said. Yili said in a low voice, I am not only the Wang Fei of the Prince Ding mansion, but also a member of the Mahist army. The Mahist army does not have soldiers who run away without fighting. Enchanting nodded and praised, good courage. Although I have said it more than once, I still want to say it. The luckiest thing in Prince Ding's life should be to marry such an outstanding Wang Fei. Speaking of this, Enchanting also felt a little regretful. Why did he not bring this woman to West Hill by hook or by crook? What made Enchanting feel even more regretful was why such a woman had to be Princess Ding. Could it be that the heavens did not destroy the Prince Ding mansion? Yili smiled faintly and said, the luckiest thing in Yili's life is to marry Prince Ding. Princess Ding, do you know what I will do once the West Hill army enters the pass? Enchanting asked in a low voice. Yili said calmly, no matter what Genom of Gojosian wants to do, he has to go through me first. Enchanting could not help but smile and said, it seems that Wang Fei has already guessed it. Wang Fei does not seem to have any intention of compromising. Yili looked down and said, at this point, both sides, is there any room for compromise? At this point, it was destined to be a life-and-death struggle. Enchanting praised, that's right. In that case, let us see how tenacious the Mahist army is. In addition, I also want to see, when Prince Ding loses his love forever, will he still have the mind to scheme like this? I bid farewell, Wang Fei, take care. As if he had finished speaking, Enchanting nodded at Yili and pulled the reins to return to his army. Yili nodded, likewise. Chapter 1029. 100 miles away from Feihong Pass, the Mahist army was marching towards Feihong Pass with a black flag. Mo Xiaoyao rode his horse at the front of the group. His snow-white hair made him look even colder than before. Although he had just wiped out a group of West Hill soldiers, Mo Xiaoyao's brows were still furrowed. Greetings to Prince. A fast horse came from the direction of Feihong Pass and stopped in front of Mo Xiaoyao. He did not even have time to get off the horse and saluted directly on the horse's back. Seeing him rushing over, Mo Xiaoyao's heart sank. He said, no need to be so courteous. How is Feihong Pass? The man said in a low voice, I am incompetent. Princess. Princess refuses to leave Feihong Pass. What did you say? Mo Xiaoyao's handsome face suddenly became as cold as iron. The anger in his eyes was clear. The man said, "There was a fierce battle at Fei Hong Pass yesterday. Almost half of the soldiers stationed there were killed. In addition, the 6 Qilin troops that were left at Fei Hong Pass were almost completely wiped out. Her Highness refused to leave Fei Hong Pass first." Mo Xiuyao narrowed his eyes and asked coldly, "What about the little heir?" The man said, "A few days ago, Her Highness sent the little heir back to Glass City." After listening to the Shadow Guard's report, Mo Xiuyao's face became very serious. After a while, he said sternly, "Black Cloud Cavalry, follow I first. We must reach Fei Hong Pass before noon today." The Black Cloud Cavalry soldiers following Mo Xiuyao answered in unison. Mo Xiuyao told Ling Huai and he Su to be in charge of the soldiers behind. He then led the 30,000 Black Cloud Cavalry towards Fei Hong Pass. The conversation did not last long. When Yili returned to the tower, Feng San and the others who were waiting could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. They were actually worried that Enchanting would act out of desperation and harm Yili. Yili didn't relax at all when she saw how relaxed everyone was. She didn't understand why Enchanting had specifically looked for her to say those words. However, he understood Enchanting's determination to break through Fei Hong Pass and his future plans. Therefore, their true difficulty had yet to come. This time, Enchanting did not show any mercy. Hundreds of thousands of Shilling army continued their relentless attacks. The remaining 100,000 Mahist army could not go out of the city to fight and could only defend the city walls. However, the difference in numbers between the two sides was too great. Moreover, the Mahist army's soldiers had been fighting hard for days and could be said to be extremely tired. On the other hand, the Shilling army had many soldiers and horses and could take turns to fight, so they were not very tired. Under such circumstances, when it was almost noon, the Mahist army at Fei Hong Pass was faintly unable to hold on. Enchanting looked at Yili with a smile and said, "Is Wang Fei wondering why I did not attack at the tower?" Yili shook her head and said, "Compared to this, I am more curious. How did Genom of Gojoseon recover in such a short time?" No one knew Enchanting's injury better than Yili. Due to the improper treatment of the West Hills military doctors, Enchanting's injury would only be more serious than she had expected. Han Mingyue stood beside Yili and smiled gently. "This is not strange. This one remembers that there is a method that can increase a person's potential in the shortest amount of time. Even if the person is seriously injured, they can exert more power in a short time." Enchanting looked coolly at Han Mingyue and said, "Master Mingyue is indeed experienced and knowledgeable." Han Mingyue took a step forward and stood in front of Yili without a trace. He sighed and said, "I would rather not know. There was nothing in the world that did not have a price." The method that Han Mingyue spoke of was so heaven-defying, then the price that had to be paid was self-evident. Enchanting would do such a thing. It was clear that he did not plan on living. A martial arts master might not be scary, but a martial arts master who did not want to live was definitely scary. Looking at the proud Enchanting, Han Mingyue shook her head and said, "Genom of Gojoseon is also a hero. Why do you have to take things so hard?" Enchanting was not angry. There was not even a trace of emotion. At this point, it could be said that he had reached the end of the road. Although he did not understand how he had been tricked by Mo Xiuyao, he had lost. It was not that he did not have the courage to admit defeat. But before this, he could still do something for the West Hill, or he could still stab Mo Xiuyao viciously. Chapter 1030. Genom of Gojoseon should know Mo Xiuyao's temper. If something happens to Princess Ding, your hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Han Mingyue reminded him faintly. Enchanting smiled and nodded, saying, "Many thanks for young Master Mingyu's reminder, but, from the moment they followed I to attack Fei Hong Pass, they didn't plan on living. So, I'm afraid I cannot accept young Master Mingyu's kindness. Han Mingyue sighed. If he could, he really didn't want to fight with Lei Jinting. With his martial arts, in another 10 years, he might be able to fight Lei Jinting to a draw. But right now, there was nothing he could do. Also, the reversal method that Lei Jinting used was a method that could gather all the power in one's body in a short amount of time. In this situation, in 24 hours, Lei Jinting's power was twice as strong as usual. Not just him, even if Mo Xiaoyao came personally, it would be difficult. Lei Jinting examined Yili, who was standing next to Han Mingyue. He asked curiously, Wang Fei really doesn't blame Mo Xiaoyao at all. Yili raised her eyes and frowned slightly. This Fei doesn't understand Genom of Gojoseon's meaning. Lei Jinting laughed loudly and said, Wang Fei is a smart person. How can you not understand I's meaning? If it wasn't for Mo Xiaoyao's scheme, the 200,000 soldiers guarding Fei Hong Pass and Wang Fei's Qilin would not have been trapped by I at Fei Hong Pass. Now, they are about to be completely wiped out. Does Wang Fei not have any resentment in your heart? Yili lowered her eyes and thought for a moment before saying faintly, this Fei is not good at making choices, but I know what it means to win the biggest victory with the smallest price. From the standpoint of the Prince Ding mansion, his decision is only beneficial. Why should this Fei have any resentment? Lei Jinting examined Yili for a moment. In the end, he could only sigh helplessly. I was thinking, never mind, if Wang Fei had the same thoughts as other women, then she wouldn't be Princess Ding. Wang Fei. I have offended you. Finishing, Lei Jinting did not waste words. His gaze towards Yili was instantly filled with murderous intent, and an oppressive aura pressed towards Yili. Lei Jinting was not a person that liked to waste words. The reason that he had said so much to Yili was because he was certain that Mo Xiaoyao could not return so quickly. Also, he wanted to sow discord between Mo Xiaoyao and Yili. If Princess Ding died with resentment towards Prince Ding, what kind of blow would that be to Prince Ding, who loved his wife as much as his life? It was a pity that Yili's mind was unexpectedly tenacious and steady. She was not moved by him at all. Lei Jinting had no choice but to give up his plan with some regret. Without Lei Jinting speaking, Yili and the others knew that the present situation was unavoidable. Lei Jinting knocked down Han Mingyue and the other three with one blow and then ignored them. He directly slashed his sword at Yili. Yili hurriedly retreated a few steps. Then, Lei Jinting's sword aura followed her like a shadow. Seeing that there was no way out, Yili gritted her teeth and a cold light flashed in her hand. Instead of retreating, she rushed towards Lei Jinting. A smile flashed across Lei Jinting's lips. It was as if he was mocking Yili for overestimating herself. At the top of the city, a cold light flashed. In an instant, it attacked Lei Jinting as fast as lightning. Feeling the threat of a master of the same level, Lei Jinting immediately gave up on Yili and raised his hand to block the opponent's attack. Not far away, a figure in blue clothes stood on the city wall behind Yili. The person looked at Lei Jinting coldly and said, "Since when did Genom of Gojoseon like to bully the weak? Since you want to fight, why don't you come to me?" Yili dodged Lei Jinting's sword and panted slightly. She retreated to one side and left the battlefield to Ling Taihan. Lei Jinting looked regretfully at Yili, who had already retreated to Han Mingyue and the others. He looked at Ling Taihan and said, "You really know how to pick the right time." Ling Taihan said indifferently, "Didn't you ask me to come to you?" Lei Jinting frowned and said, "You can't possibly get here so quickly." According to his calculations, he should have finished dealing with everything by the time Ling Taihan arrived. Ling Taihan hugged his sword and said, "It is indeed impossible. But a few days ago, someone told me that if I didn't feel it sooner, I might not be able to see you. Now, it seems that he wasn't wrong." Lei Jinting's current appearance was very strong, but it was only for the next 48 hours. After 48 hours, not only would he lose all his martial arts, but he would also lose his life. Enchanting was also a first-class master in the world. Naturally, he would not understand the reason for Enchanting's current situation. Mo Xiaoyao again. He can even calculate such a situation. Enchanting frowned. Ling Taihan did not hide and nodded. Yes, I saw him 10 days ago. But he told me that Genom of Gojoseon would definitely lose his life in 10 days. If he wanted to find you, it would be best to do it before 10 days. So, I arrived at Feihong Pass 2 days ago. I didn't expect to see a good show at that time. Enchanting naturally understood what he meant by a good show. However, at his level, there was nothing to be angry about. He shook the long sword in his hand and said, "In that case, let's do it. After killing you, we can still deal with Princess Ding. At this point, there is no difference whether I is here or not." The soldiers of West Hill had already received his orders. Once they attacked Feihong Pass, they did not need to care about anything. They just needed to destroy the entire northwest as much as possible. When these soldiers and horses scattered all over the northwest, even if Mo Xiaoyao's million-strong army came back, it would still be a headache. Under such circumstances, it was not that important whether Enchanting was here or not. Ling Taihan nodded solemnly and said, "That's good. The grudges between us should have been settled long ago. If I die in your hands in this battle, it means that I am not as good as you. If you lose, I promise that I will not find trouble with Enchanting." Enchanting smiled with satisfaction and said, "In that case, I will take advantage of you. Please. Please." Princess, Qin Feng pressed on his throbbing wound with one hand and looked at the two people facing each other on the city wall. Especially when he looked at Ling Taihan, his gaze was even more complicated. Who would have thought that the one who saved the princess's life this time was Ling Taihan, who had almost killed the princess back then? They did not expect that the prince had secretly arranged such a move. If Ling Taihan had not arrived in time, it would have been difficult for them to save the princess from Enchanting with their martial arts. Yili nodded and said in a low voice, "Don't worry about them. Stop the West Hill soldiers from entering the pass at all costs." Qin Feng and the others nodded in unison and said, "We obey." Chapter 1031. The great battle on top of the city gate tower should have attracted countless martial artists to come and watch. But at this time in Feihong Pass, no one had the time to care about this. Whether it was the West Hill soldiers who were eager to rush into the pass, or the Mahist army soldiers who were desperately resisting the enemy, no one was in the mood to watch this great battle. In everyone's heart, there was only one goal, and that was the enemy. The city gate was finally broken by the heavy giant wood. The Mahist army soldiers blocked the gate with their flesh and blood and fought with the enemy. On the city gate tower, on the streets, the soldiers of the two armies could be seen fighting everywhere. Whether it was the imminent death of Genom of Gojoseon or Princess Ding's willingness to live and die with the soldiers guarding the city, it greatly stimulated the morale of the soldiers of the two armies. No one was willing to take half a step back, and they fought a bloody battle. No one knew how long this bloody battle lasted. Almost everyone, including Yili, was covered in blood. When they were exhausted, they finally heard the sound of horse hooves coming from outside the pass. Feng Zhiyao was shocked. He suddenly jumped up and shouted, "The Black Cloud Cavalry is here. The prince is back." Suddenly, all the soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were shocked. Especially when they heard the sound of horse hooves gradually approaching, everyone's heart surged with an uncontrollable joy. The prince was finally back. The reinforcements were finally here. They had finally defended Feihong Pass. With the arrival of the Black Cloud Cavalry, the pressure on the guards at the city gate suddenly decreased a lot. The shieling army that was still outside the city could not help but be confused because of this sudden change. The Black Cloud cavalry took advantage of the gap and rushed directly into the city. The rider at the front of the Black Cloud cavalry was wearing white clothes and had white hair. He had an awe-inspiring aura. Close the front and back gates. Although Feihong Pass was called a pass, there was still a small city inside the pass. However, this city was not big, and most of the people living in it were soldiers who were stationed here. There were very few ordinary people. Because of the impending war, the civilians had already retreated to the rear. At this moment, the city was filled with Mahist army soldiers. Once the city gates were closed, the West Hills soldiers who had not yet entered the city would naturally have to expend effort to attack again, while the West Hills soldiers who had already entered the city would be trapped in the city. Li Li. Li Li. Mo Xiaoyao urged his horse to gallop through the streets. A few West Hills soldiers who were foolish enough to try to sneak up on them were whipped a few dozen feet away. Finally, he saw the slender figure at a corner of the street. Her white robes had already been stained with blood. Even from afar, one could still see that her beautiful face was also stained with blood. In that instant, Mo Xiaoyao felt as if his heart had been whipped by a whip. It was so painful that it felt like it was being torn apart. Xiaoyao. Suddenly hearing Mo Xiaoyao's figure, Yili panicked for a moment. She had already lost count of how many people she had killed today. Her entire person seemed to emit a thick stench of blood. At this moment, suddenly hearing Mo Xiaoyao's voice, for a moment, she only felt that it was both real and illusory. Careful! Han Mingyue shouted in a low voice. She threw the sword in her hand at the West Hills soldiers behind Yili who were preparing to sneak up on her. At the same time, Mo Xiaoyao leapt from his horse. Like a swan crossing water, he leapt in front of Yili and raised his hand to pull her into his embrace. Xiaoyao. Yili was startled. Only now did she clearly see the person hugging her. Mo Xiaoyao tightly held the person in his arms. For the first time in his life, he felt incomparable fear. He, Mo Xiaoyao, was a person who could take every conceivable possibility into account. Everyone in the world could be played in the palm of his hand. But this time, he had really miscalculated. He could not imagine what he would do if something really happened to Yili. Mo Xiaoyao held Yili with one hand and waved the horsewhip in his other hand. Streams of energy shot out in all directions like poisonous arrows. For a moment, not a single West Hills soldier within 100 feet of them was spared. The West Hills soldiers in the distance did not dare to come forward because of Prince Ding's reputation. Han Mingyue drew her sword from the body of the fallen West Hills soldier. She stepped forward and said, "You're finally back." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. For the first time in more than 10 years, he looked at Han Mingyue with such seriousness. In a low voice, he said, "Thank you." Like Yili, Han Mingyue was also covered in blood. The image of an elegant gentleman no longer existed. Moreover, Han Mingyue had many wounds on her body. It was clear that Han Mingyue had always been by Yili's side to protect him. Han Mingyue smiled faintly, even though her face was still stained with the blood of the enemy. The smile in her eyes had some of the warmth of the moonlight breeze and the elegant demeanor of the famous Master Mingyu of the past. Han Mingyue knew that after this battle, the estrangement between them for so many years could be completely resolved. Han Mingyue understood Mo Xiaoyao's character well enough. Mo Xiaoyao would not hate him. He would only ignore him forever. He would treat him as if he had never had a friend and brother. When she walked out of the fog of infatuation, Han Mingyue finally realized what she had lost for this hopeless relationship. Mo Xiaoyao's return naturally caused a big commotion. After a while, Feng Zhiyao and the others also rushed over. Feng Zhiyao did not have time to exchange pleasantries. He hurriedly asked Mo Xiuyao, "How many people did you bring back?" Mo Xiuyao said, 30,000. Feng Zhiyao's face suddenly became very ugly. There were hundreds of thousands of West Hill soldiers. 30,000 people were useless. Mo Xiuyao said calmly, "Don't worry. Ling Huai will bring people here soon. We just need to delay the West Hill people as much as possible and block them in the Feihong Pass and the small town." At this point, there was nothing more to say. Feng Zhiyao also directly turned around. "I know. But I don't know how much time we can delay. What if someone breaks out?" Mo Xiuyao frowned and said, "There are soldiers stationed in every county. Although there are not many, it is enough to block some of the remaining soldiers." Yili said lightly, "I have ordered all the people within 100 miles of the Feihong Pass to fight to the death and retreat." Hearing this, everyone was happy. Except for Yili and the others, no one had thought of this idea. Although it was not easy to make all the people retreat, with the prestige of the Prince Ding mansion, as long as Princess Ding personally gave the order, at least 80 to 90% of the people would retreat. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief after solving the problem they were most worried about. Feng Zhiyao said with a smile, "In this case, we will do our best to stop the Xiling army. We will definitely be able to hold on until General Leng arrives. Princess Consort, I will take my leave." As long as the people did not suffer heavy casualties, even if some houses and crops were destroyed, it would not be a particularly big loss for the Mahist army. Although they had been fighting for years, the foundation of the entire Northwest was not damaged because of these years of planning and development. "I will take my leave," everyone said in unison. They all turned around and rushed to their respective battlefields. By the way, Enchanting and Tower Master Ling are still on the tower. Yili just remembered. But she herself was not sure how much time had passed in this fierce battle. But Enchanting did not appear again. If the two were not still fighting, or if Enchanting had died in battle, then the two of them had died together. Chapter 1032. Mo Xiuyao wasn't worried at all about Ling Taihan, who had been tricked into helping him. Ling Taihan wanted to take revenge on Enchanting anyways. He was just giving him a chance to save his subordinate. Even though Ling Taihan had accidentally saved Yili, he wouldn't feel guilty if Ling Taihan lost his life because of this. Mo Xiuyao took off his cloak and put it on Yili. He said softly, "Lili, go back and change your clothes first." Yili rolled her eyes at him, then turned and walked towards the city gate tower. The battle on the city gate tower was still ongoing. Enchanting's reversal technique was indeed shocking. With Ling Taihan's cultivation, even if Enchanting wasn't injured, he wouldn't be a match for him. But when Yili and the others arrived, the one covered in injuries was actually Ling Taihan. However, Ling Taihan had spent his entire life studying martial arts. His personality was tenacious. Even though he was covered in injuries, he didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Hearing Mo Xiuyao and the others walk up the city gate tower, Enchanting was the first to retreat. "Mo Xiuyao, it's you again." Enchanting narrowed his eyes as he stared at Mo Xiuyao. Perhaps it was because of this battle, or because Mo Xiuyao had returned early, or because his plan had been foiled, his originally deep and desolate eyes were somewhat bloodshot. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows indifferently. Only Yili, whose hand he was holding, could tell that he wasn't as calm as he looked. Mo Xiuyao laughed, "Of course it's I. I'm the one who's curious. Why aren't you dead yet?" Enchanting sneered, "You haven't died yet, so how can I die?" After saying that, Enchanting ignored Ling Taihan and flew towards Mo Xiuyao. However, the sword in his hand was pointed straight at Yili, who was standing beside Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao's expression changed as he sent Yili behind Han Mingyue. He then unsheathed his incineration sword and swung it towards Enchanting mercilessly. Enchanting, I will make sure you die a horrible death. Mo Xiaoyao sneered. In the blink of an eye, the two of them began to exchange blows. Enchanting didn't show any signs of weakness as he laughed. We still don't know who will die a horrible death. It had to be said that even people like Han Mingyue and Ling Taihan were secretive about the heaven-defying effects of the reversal technique. After the battle between Enchanting and Ling Taihan, it didn't seem like he had used up too much energy. He was still as fast as lightning when he fought with Mo Xiaoyao. This feeling almost reminded Mo Xiaoyao of the first time he fought with Enchanting more than 10 years ago when he just came out of the pugilistic world. At that time, his martial arts were slightly inferior to Enchanting's. But now, Mo Xiaoyao was in the prime of his life, while Enchanting was gradually aging. Mo Xiaoyao had absolute confidence that his martial arts cultivation was stronger than Enchanting's. But even so, when he fought with Enchanting, Mo Xiaoyao still felt a trace of pressure. Seeing this, Ling Taihan didn't hesitate to join the battle. In this situation, there was no such thing as bullying with numbers. Enchanting had used the reversal technique, so he was already dead. There was no need for the people present to die with him. More importantly, it was impossible for Mo Xiaoyao to back out now. Since that was the case, Ling Taihan didn't mind fighting with two of them. With the suppression of two powerful experts, Enchanting was finally at a disadvantage. But even so, Ling Taihan and Mo Xiaoyao still had many new wounds. This battle lasted from day to night. Yili and Han Mingyue couldn't interfere at all, but neither of them dared to take half a step away. All they could do was watch the three people fighting. Seeing the most dangerous part, Han Mingyue finally couldn't help but shout and laugh loudly. Yili stood to the side and watched, a faint smile on her lips. Han Mingyue watched the battle between the three powerful experts of the world, and unexpectedly broke through her mental state. Her martial arts that had been stagnant for many years reached a new level. Presumably, in a few years, young Master Mingyu's name would be among the top 4 experts of the world. Under the night sky, the entire Feihong Pass was still brightly lit. In the small city, there were countless soldiers fighting in every street and alley. The smell of blood permeated the entire city. On the back of the city wall, old General Yuan Pei and a few soldiers were stationed on the city gate tower. Under the city gate tower was a city gate that was only a third of the width of the Feihong Pass in front of them. But behind this gate was more than half of the northwest region. All of the soldiers were exhausted, but they still held their weapons tightly in their hands. Again and again, they killed the enemies that were charging at them. Behind them were the people and land they had to protect. They had nowhere to retreat. They had no other choice but to kill the enemies in the city gate. Another wave of West Hill soldiers rushed over the streets and the interception of the Maoist army soldiers. Yuan Pei's expression was solemn as he said in a clear voice, "Archers, fire." Arrows shot out like rain. A group of enemies fell, but soon more people continued to rush up. The soldiers guarding the city gate rushed up and engaged in close combat with the enemies who had rushed out from the arrows. Just when everyone thought that these days would never end, the heavy sound of horse hooves finally sounded in the distance again. Even from afar, people could feel the sound of the earth shaking. It was the sound of thousands of soldiers and horses rushing over. At this time, everyone knew who was coming. The tired faces of the Maoist army soldiers once again bloomed with radiance. Reinforcements are coming. Reinforcements are coming. Brothers, kill them. Stop the West Hill people. Reinforcements are coming. The cheers of the Maoist army soldiers could be heard throughout the small city. Then the battle between the two sides became more intense. Linghuai led 1,000,000 soldiers into the Feihong Pass. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses of West Hill immediately collapsed. Originally, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses were blocked in the city for an entire day by the Mahist army. They had suffered heavy casualties and were already somewhat disorganized. At this time, there was suddenly an additional 1,000,000 soldiers. No matter how tenacious the willpower of the West Hills soldiers was, they could not help but collapse. Before dawn, the battle in the small city had already come to an end. The West Hills soldiers in the city either died or surrendered. When Linghuai rushed to the rear gate with his men, he was just in time to support Yuan Pei, who was a little shaky. General Yuan was over 70 years old. This day and night of fighting was already very tiring for a young man, let alone an old man like Yuan Pei. Seeing Linghuai, Yuan Pei was also relieved. If Linghuai had come a little later, they would not have been able to hold on. General Linghuai apologized. General Yuan, it's me. We're late. Thank you for your hard work. It's good that you're here. It's good that you're here. Yuan Pei said repeatedly. Then he only felt darkness in front of him and fell down. Linghuai reacted quickly and hurriedly supported him. General Yuan. General Yuan. Doctor. Feng San happened to be coming over as well. When he heard Linghuai's voice, he quickly rushed over. He held Yuan Pei's hand and felt his pulse. Then he was relieved and said, "It's nothing serious. He's probably too tired. Let's send General Yuan back first. Let Mr. Shen treat him later." Chapter 1033. Seeing that Yuan Pei was fine, Linghuai breathed a sigh of relief. Yuan Pei could be said to be the oldest veteran in the Mahist army. If something happened here, it would be a great loss for the Mahist army. After sending people to escort Yuan Pei back to the general's mansion, Linghuai and Feng Zhiyao ordered the soldiers who had just arrived to search the streets to see if there were any West Hill soldiers who had escaped. By the time they finished arranging all this, the sky was already bright. Only then did the two of them breathe a sigh of relief. They looked at each other. Feng Zhiyao suddenly shouted, "The prince and Wang Fei are still on the city gate tower." If Mo Xiuyao had finished off Enchanting, he would certainly appear with Yili to preside over the situation. The reason they had not seen the two of them until now must be that the battle on the city gate tower had not ended. When the two of them hurried to the city gate tower of Feihong Pass, Qin Feng and the others had already arrived. Although they were all covered in wounds and were either leaning against or sitting on the city gate tower without confidence, all of their expressions were incomparably relaxed. Feng Zhiyao could not help but smile. He shrugged and walked to the stairs on the side to help Qin Feng sit down under the city wall. After this battle, they would not have to fight for a long time. Shouldn't they be relaxed? As a soldier, it might be a kind of sorrow to not have the chance to go to the battlefield in their lifetime. But as a country, if they were to spend their entire life in war, it would be better for the country to perish early. Seeing Feng Zhiyao, Linghuai, and the others appear one after another, Enchanting finally understood that he had lost to the Mahist army again. His attacks became fiercer and fiercer. However, after a day and night of intense fighting, Enchanting's exhaustion was far greater than that of Ling Taihan and Mo Xiuyao. No matter how powerful the reversal technique was, it couldn't guarantee that Enchanting would be invincible in these 48 hours. Even if he was powerful, he would still be severely injured by Ling Taihan and Mo Xiuyao, the two strongest experts in the world. As a human, even if he used up all his life force, there was still a limit. Therefore, after a few fierce attacks, Mo Xiuyao and Ling Taihan could clearly feel the changes in Enchanting. The two of them glanced at each other. Ling Taihan's long sword streaked across the air and went straight for Enchanting's chest. Behind him, Mo Xiuyao leapt into the air. His sword went straight for Enchanting's head. Enchanting laughed coldly. He dodged Mo Xiuyao's sword, and grabbed Ling Taihan's long sword with one hand. Then, following Ling Taihan's sword, he rushed up and slapped his palm towards Ling Taihan's chest. Mo Xiaoyao had been waiting for this moment. The sword on his head was just a feint. The death acupuncture point on the head was such an important position. Unless Lei Jinting couldn't move, he wouldn't let others stab him so easily. Mo Xiaoyao's sword changed direction. The incineration sword flashed across the air and entered Lei Jinting's right shoulder. Lei Jinting's palm paused. Ling Taihan twisted the sword in his hand and pulled it out of Lei Jinting's hand. He lowered his body and slashed towards Lei Jinting's legs with Mo Xiaoyao. Suddenly receiving Mo Xiaoyao's sword, Lei Jinting quickly leapt out of the way in pain. He dodged Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan's two swords. However, his left leg was still cut by Ling Taihan's sword. Lei Jinting retreated all the way to the city wall before stopping. He lowered his head to look at the wound on his right shoulder and frowned. This sword wound wasn't important. However, his right shoulder had been injured by Yi Li's spear a few days ago. The injury hadn't fully healed yet. Now that Mo Xiaoyao's sword had struck him, it was like adding salt to the wound. Moreover, the reversal technique didn't allow him to completely ignore pain. Countless wounds and pain were added to his body, causing his strength to be greatly reduced. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan weren't in a hurry. They both gripped their swords tightly and looked at Lei Jinting with indifferent expressions. At this point, with Lei Jinting's personality, he definitely wouldn't run away. He probably wanted to drag someone down with him. Lei Jinting smiled faintly and said, to be able to fight with Prince Ding and the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce's leader, Ai's life wasn't in vain. Ling Taihan's expression was indifferent and didn't say anything. Mo Xiaoyao coldly smiled and said, I never planned to fight with you. I only want one thing. You die, I live. Lei Jinting was stunned. He couldn't help but laugh towards the sky, haha. Prince Ding really is Prince Ding. Mo Liufang's good son. Mo Xiaoyao, if Ling Taihan wasn't here today, the one who would die at Ai's hands would definitely be you. The most unpredictable thing in the world was people. However, Mo Xiaoyao was able to predict people's hearts. That was why even an expert like Ling Taihan could be ordered around by him. Perhaps Yili was right. The Prince Ding mansion was destroyed because of people's sinister hearts. Mo Xiaoyao learned from this painful experience and could actually see through people's desires and intentions. That was why he lost at his hands. Mo Xiaoyao didn't care about Lei Jinting's mockery. He calmly said, if Pavilion Master Ling wasn't here, you wouldn't have died here. I naturally have other ways to kill you. Lei Jinting laughed loudly. Everyone present looked at each other. No one understood what he was laughing about. Perhaps even he didn't understand. When he finally finished laughing, Lei Jinting stood up again. He pointed his sword at Mo Xiaoyao and said, Good. Good. I will take a look. How can Prince Ding make I die? Mo Xiaoyao's lips curved into a cold smile. I want you to live a life worse than death. The atmosphere on the city gate tower changed again. Everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths as they stared at the three people facing off. The battle of life and death between the three people with the highest achievements in martial arts in the world was about to be decided. At the same time, it also meant that the final winner of this battle for supremacy that had lasted for many years was about to appear. Even though many people already knew who the world would belong to, they still couldn't help but feel their hearts tremble. Chapter 1034. On the city walls, a few dazzling rays of light flashed. 3 silhouettes rose from the ground at lightning speed. Then, they engaged in a fierce battle. Ordinary martial artists would not be able to see their fight clearly. They could only see countless shadows flitting through the air and the sword chi coming from all directions. Everyone retreated to a safe place and looked up to watch this epic battle. The only one who could make out the situation was Han Mingyue. But at this time, Han Mingyue was also staring at the three people fighting in the sky. She was so focused that she did not have the mind to answer the question of the people beside her. With a loud bang, before anyone could react, a black figure fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the ground above the city gate tower. Han Mingyue and Qin Feng stood in front of Yili, one on the left and one on the right. When everyone looked over, they saw Enchanting lying on the ground. His right wrist and legs were bleeding profusely. Enchanting lay on the ground with a dispirited expression. His eyes were dim and his face was pale. Han Mingyue looked over and relaxed. Enchanting's martial arts had been crippled and his limbs were injured. He no longer had any killing power. Very quickly, Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan landed on the ground at the same time. The two of them were not in good condition. Mo Xiaoyao's snow-white robes were stained with blood. The wound on his left arm was even more shocking. Ling Taihan's blue robes had a long tear. A thin wound ran across his neck. If he was injured a little more, both of them would have been injured. Xiaoyao. Yili looked at Mo Xiaoyao's injuries and frowned slightly. Mo Xiaoyao was in an extremely good mood. After dealing with Enchanting, Mo Xiaoyao had dealt with almost all the people he wanted to deal with. Even the trace of gloominess between his brows had dissipated by quite a bit. I won. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile. Yili nodded slightly and said softly, I know. Cough cough. Enchanting, who had fallen to the ground, coughed twice and coughed out a mouthful of blood. He looked back at Mo Xiaoyao and asked, Why didn't you kill me? Mo Xiaoyao said coldly, I said. I will make your life worse than death. I always keep my word. Enchanting laughed disdainfully, I never thought that Prince Ding would also like to torture captives. Since you admit that you're a captive, that's enough. There are many things you don't know. Mo Xiaoyao laughed, Do you want to know how I plan to treat you? Mo Xiaoyao's eyes suddenly shot out a fierce light, as if he didn't want to tear Enchanting apart, but still had to endure and let him live. Before Enchanting could open his mouth, a sword light flashed from the side. Mo Xiaoyao flew into a rage, Ling Taihan, you're looking for death. Ling Taihan's sword pierced Enchanting's chest, and blood flew out. Looking at the bloody hole in Enchanting's chest, he was breathing more than he was breathing in. It was obvious that he wouldn't survive. Ling Taihan was originally standing closer to Mo Xiaoyao, and Mo Xiaoyao was supporting Yili with one hand. Ling Taihan's sword was fast and ruthless. How could Mo Xiaoyao block it in time? After Enchanting was stabbed by Ling Taihan, not only did he not feel any pain, he even looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a mocking smile. It was as if he was saying, Didn't you want me to live a life worse than death? I's going to die now. Ha! Ling Taihan, 13th brother, many thanks. Enchanting smiled faintly. His dim gaze swept past Mo Xiaoyao and Yili, and a trace of regret and worry flashed across his eyes. However, he was unable to say anything. Slowly, the last trace of light in his eyes faded away. Xiaoyao. Yili grabbed Mo Xiaoyao's hand that was about to slap Ling Taihan. She said softly, I'm a bit tired. Let's go back and rest. Mo Xiaoyao's gaze warmed. He lowered his head to look at Yili's beautiful face and the traces of blood that had not been wiped away. His eyes became even more apologetic. All right, let's go back and rest. General Lang, Feng San, I'll leave this place to you. Feng Zhiyao nodded with a bitter expression. He also hadn't rested for a day and a night, okay? Yili turned back to say to Ling Taihan, Tower Master Ling can rest in the city before you leave. Mr. Chen has a lot of medicine. Ling Taihan cupped his hands and said, "Many thanks, Princess." Seeing Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li leave hand in hand, Feng Zhiyao turned back to look at Lei Jinting's corpse on the ground. He frowned and said, "How should we deal with this?" Even though they were enemies, Lei Jinting was an ambitious and ruthless person. Feng Zhiyao didn't want to humiliate him too much. As the saying goes, a dead person's debts disappear. No matter how much hatred there was, what was a dead person? However, if Lei Jinting fell into Mo Xiaoyao's hands, he would probably die without a complete corpse. Ling Huai raised his eyebrows. He had the same thoughts as Feng Zhiyao. Ling Huai was a military general of orthodox birth. He always had some respect for famous generals. Unless it was necessary, he normally wouldn't humiliate the enemy's corpse outside of the battlefield. That was the behavior of the weak. Ling Taihan glanced at Lei Jinting on the ground and said, "Is it possible for me to bring him back to Xiling?" "Of course." Ling Huai and Feng San looked at each other. Feng Zhiyao said, "But he must be cremated at the Prince Ding mansion. Pavilion Master Ling can only bring his ashes back." It wasn't that Feng Zhiyao was too cautious. After the incident of Mo Xiaoyao coming back from the dead, Feng Zhiyao really didn't want to take the slightest risk. Ling Taihan didn't mind. He was already very loyal to his friends by collecting Lei Jinting's corpse. He nodded and said, "It doesn't matter. I can wait a few days." Feng Zhiyao said, "There's no need to wait a few days. It will be done soon." He didn't want Ling Taihan to wait here for a few days. It seemed that the prince's anger towards Lei Jinting had not subsided. Maybe he would come to find trouble with Ling Taihan after he recovered. If that was all, it would be fine. Ling Taihan was now seriously injured. There was no need for the prince to come out. The Prince Ding mansion had plenty of ways to kill him. But it seemed that the consort didn't want Ling Taihan to die. If the consort was angry with the prince, it wouldn't be good for them as subordinates. Ling Huai naturally didn't think as much as Feng Zhiyao. He looked at Feng Zhiyao strangely. He thought that there was nothing wrong and nodded in agreement. Ling Taihan nodded and said, "Thank you very much. Pavilion Master Ling, you're welcome." "Speaking of which, we should thank Pavilion Master Ling," Feng Zhiyao said sincerely. No matter the reason, it was a fact that Ling Taihan had saved their lives, including the consorts. If Ling Taihan hadn't come in time, it would have been hard to say what would have happened today. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao returned to the general's fu. After freshening up, Mo Xiaoyao came out and saw Yi Li sitting at the table staring at the food in front of her. Even though they had just gone through a great battle that had almost wiped out the entire army, the servants of the general's fu still did their best to prepare a delicious breakfast. Not long after the two had returned, it was ready for the two to eat after they had freshened up. After freshening up, Yi Li had changed out of her bloodied clothing and washed away the tiredness and blood on her face. She appeared even more beautiful and moving. Seeing her in a daze as she stared at the food in front of her, Mo Xiaoyao frowned in displeasure. He instinctively felt displeased. Lightly walking forward, he hugged her from behind. Mo Xiaoyao asked softly, "Li, what are you thinking about?" Chapter 1035. Yi Li came back to her senses and shook her head. "It's nothing. I've been so tense these days. I don't know what to do now that I've relaxed." Mo Xiaoyao rubbed her hair apologetically and said softly, "It's all my fault, Li. There won't be anything that can upset you in the future. I'll do whatever you want to do in the future, okay?" That's right, from now on, there was nothing that could annoy him. There was no one in this world that could threaten his Lily. The northern tribes had been defeated. They would not be able to recover for the next 30 to 50 years. Lei Jinting was dead. Most of the elite soldiers of West Hill were left at Feihong Pass. In the south, they still had to face the 300,000 soldiers led by Murongshin and Marquis Nan from the Dechu state. There was also the enmity between the Jinan Palace and the Emperor of Xiling. With Lei Dingfeng's ability, it was good enough that he could protect himself. As for the Dechu state in the south, Mo Jingli had been exiled. A child who had not yet reached adulthood had ascended the throne. The power was only in the hands of the ministers and the Empress Dowager. They would not be able to cause any trouble. In the future, who in the world would dare to touch his Miss Li? Yili looked at him in surprise. Mo Xiuyao blinked and smiled. Miss Li, why are you looking at me like that? Yili asked, are you planning to withdraw the troops? We've finished fighting. What else can we do but withdraw? Mo Xiuyao smiled. Yili was silent. She did not expect Mo Xiuyao to withdraw so soon. These days, Mo Xiuyao's plans and strategies gave her a bad feeling. It was not that there was anything wrong with being ambitious. Mo Xiuyao had the ability and the qualifications to conquer the world. He even had the world under his control. But perhaps it was because these days, each battle was crueler than the last, that she developed an uncontrollable hatred for war. He had seen too many dead people in the past few years. Pulling Yili into his embrace, Mo Xiuyao's handsome face carried a gentle smile. He gently patted Yili's back and said softly, Li, are you tired? Why don't you rest for a while? Yili nodded unconsciously. She leaned against Mo Xiuyao and slowly closed her eyes. She was indeed a little tired. When Yili was fast asleep, Mo Xiuyao gently carried her to the bed. Mo Xiuyao leaned over to look at Yiran's beautiful face that was frowning slightly in her sleep. He tenderly raised his hand and gently traced her face. He whispered with a smile, Silly Li, how could I not know what you are thinking? What's more, if I were to finish playing, wouldn't Mo Xiaobao become a prodigal? He gently covered Yili with a blanket. Mo Xiuyao turned around and left the room. There were a few lines of himself written on the top of the rice paper placed outside the room. It was obvious that the owner of the writing had forgotten to keep it in a hurry. When the soldiers left the Huai border, the roads were clear. Crows flew in the cold sky. Pitiful white bones piled up in a lonely grave, all for the general's military achievements. Using this poem to describe the Mahist army might be a little biased, but it was also obvious that the writer's thoughts and feelings about the current situation. Yili was indeed very tired. When she woke up, the sky had already darkened. If Mo Xiuyao wasn't worried that it would be bad for her body if she didn't eat for too long, she might have continued to sleep. Yili sat up and looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was sitting leisurely by her bed. He didn't change at all before she fell asleep. She knew that he hadn't rested at all. In fact, Yili and the guards of Feihong Pass were not the only ones who were tired. Mo Xiuyao heard that Yili was still in Feihong Pass halfway, so he rushed back with his men. Then, there was a big battle with Lei Jinting. It was impossible to say that he wasn't tired. Why didn't you rest? Yili frowned and asked softly. Mo Xiuyao shook his head with a smile and said softly, looking at Yili, I'm not tired. Yili has slept for a long time. It's time to get up and have some dinner. Yili looked at the man with a gentle smile in front of her speechlessly. It was as if the gloominess and ruthlessness when facing Lei Jinting and Ling Taihan had never existed. Looking at her silent appearance, Mo Xiuyao retracted his smile and pulled Yili into his embrace, asking softly, Is Yili angry at me? Yili was silent for a moment. Then, she sighed softly and shook her head, saying, No, I know, you're right. Mo Xiuyao fell silent as well. After a while, he smiled and looked at Yili, saying, It's just that you can't accept it, right? That's right. This time. I did it on purpose. How could those trash of Mo Jinglies be able to hurt me? Actually, I already had this plan when Yi Li handed me the list of infinite boundless mountain spies. I understand Mo Jingli. I know what he will do when forced into a corner. Li, you see. Now, everything is developing as I imagined. It's just that I didn't think that Yi Li actually didn't listen to me and leave Feihong Pass. If it weren't for Ling Taihan, even if he had arrived. Fortunately, I was right to leave Ling Taihan alive back then. Mo Xiuyao's hands around Yi Li's waist trembled slightly. However, he lowered his head and looked at Yi Li with a faint smile in his eyes and in his low voice. Such a stubborn smile made Yi Li feel even more bitter in her heart. She couldn't blame this man. Yi Li gently leaned into Mo Xiuyao's embrace and thought silently. No matter how many things he did, no matter how many ideas he had that she couldn't agree with or accept, she would never be able to blame him. This wasn't his fault. He wanted revenge. He wanted to protect his family and loved ones. He wanted the Prince Ding mansion to continue existing in this world. Chapter 1036. Mo Xiuyao lowered his head and gently patted Yi Li's back, comforting her silently. Yi Li, who saw everything so clearly, gave people a sense of vulnerability that they had never felt before. Mo Xiuyao held her in his arms, with stubborn persistence and regret on his thin lips. I'm sorry, Li, Mo Xiuyao said in a low voice. He was sorry for her, but he would not admit his mistake. Like Yi Li, as the highest commander of the Maoist army, he did not make any wrong decisions. Even if the Maoist army could not rescue them in time, and all the soldiers in Feihong Pass were killed in battle, and even if the West Hill soldiers broke into Feihong Pass and wreaked havoc, no one could say that Prince Ding's decision was wrong. He led the Maoist army, which was several times smaller than the enemy's, to face the siege of 3 countries. This time, he finished the battle in one fell swoop, greatly shortening the time of the war. As a superior, he was right. The only person he was sorry for was his wife, his lover. He let her bear so many pain and choices that she should not have to bear, and let her personally ruin the Qi Lin that she had trained and built by herself. From the beginning to the end, he, Mo Xiuyao, had only let down Yi Li, his most beloved wife, who he had once decided to protect forever and make him happy and carefree. It's okay, Yi Li said softly, but her heart was full of tenderness. No matter what he did, she would forgive him. Yi Li smiled faintly in her heart. It turned out that long ago, she had already loved him so much. Li, it will never happen again. Okay, I know. The faint pain in her heart might never disappear, but it would gradually fade away. There was never anything perfect in life, but now, it was already very good. A man who could turn the world upside down, but who would be uneasy because of your mood, a few smart, cute, and clever children, a group of family members who would always think of you sincerely, and a group of loyal friends and subordinates. What was there to be unsatisfied with such a life? Perhaps she and Mo Xiuyao would never have the same ideas. For example, she did not like schemes, but he was best at killing people without paying for it. For example, she always believed that life was precious, but he did not mind playing with the lives of irrelevant people. But he would give in for her, and she would tolerate him. That was enough. Princess. Please come. This subordinate requests an audience. Feng Jiyao's voice sounded from outside the door. Not long after, Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li appeared in the parlor outside hand in hand. Feng Jiyao was not the only one who came. Ling Huai, Han Mingyue, He Su, and even General Yuan Pei, who had fainted in the morning, were all present. Seeing the two come in hand, Feng Jiyao inwardly sighed in relief. Feng Jiyao was not only Mo Xiuyao's childhood friend, he could also be considered Yi Li's good friend. Young Master Feng San naturally knew more about these two people than the others. Originally, he thought that there would be some conflict between the two of them, but he didn't expect that nothing would happen. Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but look at Yi Li a few more times. His evaluation of Yi Li increased. Receiving Mo Xiaoyao's warning gaze, Feng Zhiyao coughed lightly and withdrew his gaze. He smiled and said, Princess, sorry for the disturbance. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him coolly and said, you still know. What are you doing here so late? Yi Li helplessly raised her hand and pulled. She smiled at Yuan Pei and said, Old General, are you feeling better? Yuan Pei hurriedly said, many thanks for Princess's concern. This general is well. It's just that I'm old and a bit useless. I've made Princess laugh. Yi Li smiled and said, Old General, what are you saying? This time, it's all thanks to Old General's presence. Li is right. Old General Yuan, please sit. Seeing Yi Li's gaze on him, Mo Xiaoyao also said with a smile, everyone hasn't eaten dinner yet. Why don't we eat together? Feng Zhiyao silently rolled his eyes. It's you and Princess who haven't eaten dinner yet, right? Since Prince Ding personally invited them, they naturally couldn't refuse. In a moment, the maids delivered the prepared dinner. It was all very bland food. These days, everyone was very tired and no one seriously ate a meal. For a moment, their appetites were greatly stimulated and they happily ate a sumptuous and delicious dinner. After the maids removed the leftovers, Mo Xiaoyao asked, why are you here so late? Is there something urgent? Ling Huai stood up and said, reporting to Prince, we want to ask, how should we deal with the captives in West Hill? In fact, this wasn't an urgent matter. However, they were dragged here by Feng Zhiyao. At this moment, Feng Zhiyao looked like he had eaten and drank enough and pretended to be dead. Ling Huai had no choice but to bring up this matter. Although it wasn't urgent, it wasn't a small matter. There were nearly 100,000 captives in West Hill. With so many people, it was a big problem no matter where they were placed. No matter how they dealt with it, it would be troublesome. Hearing this, Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed. He was about to speak but paused when he saw Yi Li beside him. He pondered for a moment and said, send someone back to West Hill. We don't need much. 50 taels of silver per soldier. Ling Huai hesitated. Will the West Hill people agree? 50 taels of silver wasn't much, but 100,000 people added together was a lot. Moreover, it wasn't difficult to gather 100,000 soldiers with this idea. At the very least, it wouldn't cost 5 or 6 million taels of silver. To Celine, this wasn't a very good deal. Mo Xiaoyao laughed coldly and said, announce this matter to the world. They have to agree even if they don't. If they don't agree, send them all to the north to farm. The north had been ruined beyond recognition by the northern tribes. It just so happened that they lacked people to farm. Ling Huai thought about it and couldn't help but laugh. As expected, Prince Ding was resourceful. This general obeys. Chapter 1037. The war was finally over. Although there was still a faint smell of blood in Feihong Pass after a fierce battle, there was a sense of serenity in the past. On the streets, at the city gates, there were no people coming in and out leisurely. The soldiers of the Maoist army silently cleaned up the battlefield and washed the bloodstains on the streets. Some of the bloodstains were from their comrades, some were from their enemies. Mixed together, no one could tell who had shed the blood, but both sides of the battle had paid a terrible price. In the morning, Yi Li took Qin Feng, Zhua Jing, and Wei Lin out of Feihong Pass and came to a hillside not far from Feihong Pass. When they arrived, there were already many people waiting there. Most of the people present were injured, and some were even seriously injured. Everyone had a solemn look on their faces. This was the place where more than 1,000 Qilin were buried. Seeing Yi Li arrive, the more than 100 Qilin immediately stood up straight and saluted in unison, "Greetings to Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded solemnly and stood up, "No need to be so polite. Many thanks to Wang Fei for personally coming to attend the funeral of our brothers." A middle-aged man with a face full of vicissitudes came forward and saluted Yi Li respectfully. This was the only surviving commander of the Qilin squad who was stationed at Feihong Pass this time. Although Yi Li could not remember the names of all the Qilin team members, Yi Li knew most of the team leaders. Because most of these people were the first batch of Qilin team members who stood out. Many of their skills were even taught by Yi Li personally. Yi Li still remembered that this middle-aged man was called Li Yu. He had the same name as the elegant and knowledgeable Li Yu of Southern Tang, but he was a completely different person. Even when facing his own comrades, he was still very polite. This time, he took the initiative to come forward and talk to Yi Li. It was indeed not easy for him to take the initiative to talk to her. A bitter smile appeared on Yi Li's face. "They were all taught by me, so how could I not come? I'm sorry." The usually silent man's eyes instantly turned red. He looked at Yi Li and choked out, "No, it has nothing to do with Wang Fei. Since he was a soldier, it was a blessing to die on the battlefield. It's just that we..." Yi Li looked around. Compared to the neat and extraordinary Qilin of the past, the more than 100 wounded soldiers now looked somewhat dispirited and sorrowful. Over 100 men who had never retreated in the face of thousands of soldiers and horses were now looking at the neat rows of tombs in front of them with red eyes. Lying inside were all their comrades who had gone through fire and water with them. Perhaps 2 days ago, they had gathered together to chat and laugh about their families, wives, children, and future. But now, they were separated by life and death. Yi Li sighed softly and walked to the front of the tomb, where there was a small open space. She respectfully bowed 3 times to the tombs and said in a deep voice, "Chancellor." Behind her, Qin Feng and Wei Lin took the wine jars and walked to the tombs in front of them. They sprinkled some wine in front of each grave. The Qilin soldiers at the side saw this and followed the 2 of them to sprinkle wine along each grave. The low whimpering sound of a zither came from the empty space in front of them. Everyone turned back and saw Yi Li sitting on the ground with a simple ebony zither on her knees. Yi Li's white fingers strummed and the whimpering sound of the zither slowly flowed from her fingers. The sound of the zither was simple and unadorned, and the faint melody it played was even more desolate and sorrowful. This was the soul-summoning song. Yi Li's zither skills were not very good. There was not even a trace of sorrow on her face. However, the sound of the zither that flowed out from her fingers made everyone feel a faint sadness and regret. Yes, it was not sorrow, but regret. Regret that she could not do better. Regret that so many outstanding soldiers died in such a way. Suddenly, the sound of the zither changed and gradually became more intense. Every string seemed to be plucking at everyone's heart. It made everyone involuntarily think of the past. The pride and joy of just joining Qilin, the countless difficult training and the experience of going through life and death together, and the pride of going to the battlefield together. A man should know that the kindness of the country is great. Dying on the battlefield is a good ending. Someone shouted in a deep voice, "Brothers! Farewell! Toast!" Everyone raised the wine jars in their hands and faced the tombs in front of them and drank it in one gulp. In the sound of the zither, countless tears flowed down together with the wine, wetting the land under their feet where countless heroes slept. "Brothers, go well, take care of yourselves." After the song ended, Yi Li stood up and casually placed the ebony zither on the ground beside her. Looking at the tearful soldiers in front of her, she said in a deep voice, Li Yu. The middle-aged commander called Li Yu came forward and said respectfully, "This subordinate is here." Yi Li looked at him and said in a deep voice, "From now on, you are Qi Lin's deputy commander. This consort orders you to take Qi Lin back to recuperate. Once everyone's injuries are healed, immediately return to Glass City. Within a year, this consort wants to see a complete Qi Lin. Can you do it?" Li Yu could not help but be stunned. Meeting Yi Li's firm and clear eyes, he hurriedly said, "This subordinate accepts the order. This subordinate promises that within a year, I will give the consort a complete Qi Lin." Yi Li's order really gave Li Yu a shock. The importance and rank of Qi Lin's deputy commander was extremely extraordinary. Even the third son of the Su family, who had joined Qi Lin for several years, was absolutely top-notch in terms of ability and ferocity on the battlefield. Moreover, he was Princess Ding's cousin. Even so, Su Qingfeng was just one of the 12 commanders of Qi Lin. At this time, the consort promoted him to deputy commander. As if reading Li Yu's mind, Yi Li said lightly, "Those who left are your brothers. This consort hopes that you can personally fill their positions again. This subordinate accepts the order." Li Yu said loudly. This time, his tone was more excited. Yi Li nodded and said, "Everyone's injuries are not healed yet. Go back and rest early." "Yes, this subordinate will leave." Li Yu nodded in response. He turned around and led more than 100 Qi Lin soldiers back to Feihong Pass. "Consort, we should also go back," Shuo Jing said softly. Yi Li shook her head and said, "I want to stay a little longer." Yi Li sat down on the ground again, placed the ebony zither on her lap and played casually. There was no fixed tune, only intermittent playing. In this bleak white graveyard, it made people feel even more sad. On a high ground not far from Qi Lin's graveyard, Mo Xiaoyao and Han Mingyue stood side by side. Looking sideways, they happened to see the calm face of the woman in plain clothes sitting on the white graveyard. Han Mingyue looked at Mo Xiaoyao, whose hair was as white as snow, and said, "Since you are worried, why don't you go and take a look?" Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him and said lightly, "I know what to do." Chapter 1038. Han Mingyue smiled faintly and did not speak. Now he could not help but envy Mo Xiaoyao for his good taste. Logically speaking, Mo Xiaoyao could not be blamed for this matter. But emotionally speaking, no matter who it was, they could not help but want to give him a slap in the face. But Yi Li had not said a single word of blame to Mo Xiaoyao. No matter whether she truly understood or tolerated Mo Xiaoyao, this was Mo Xiaoyao's great fortune. Similarly, it was probably because of this Yi Li that Mo Xiaoyao did not become more extreme. In these years, although she did not have much interaction with Mo Xiaoyao, Han Mingyue still paid attention to Mo Xiaoyao from time to time. After all, other than her only brother, Mo Xiaoyao could be considered the person Han Mingyue valued the most. In these years, Han Mingyue could vaguely sense that Mo Xiaoyao had lost control several times. But it seemed that every time Mo Xiaoyao was on the verge of losing control, he would steadily stabilize himself. Obviously, all of this had a lot to do with Yi Li. Just like last night, when Leng Hui mentioned the matter of the West Hills soldiers being held captive, Han Mingyue could clearly sense that Mo Xiaoyao had the intention to kill. But it only took a moment for him to perfectly control it. Then he methodically instructed Leng Hui on how to deal with these captives. It was as if Prince Ding was really so compassionate and magnanimous. Heaven knew that Mo Xiaoyao was never someone who would treat his enemies kindly. And at that time, the only person present who could affect Mo Xiaoyao's emotions was Yi Li. So at that moment, Han Mingyue somewhat understood why Feng Zhiyao was so nervous about the relationship between Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. If Mo Xiaoyao was a peerless sword, then Yili was the scabbard. If Mo Xiuyao was a peerless horse, then Yili was the bridle that could restrain the horse. Neither of the two could be missing. Han Mingyue lowered her head and laughed. Xiuyao, you're already past the age of being willful. Other people's tolerance is not for you to squander as you wish. At least, you should go to the Qi Lin soldiers' graves and toast a cup of wine. These people are all trained by Princess Ding herself. They are completely different from what you and I know. I always feel that Princess Consort's feelings towards these Qi Lin soldiers are not the same. This time, for your plan, you sacrificed half of the Qi Lin soldiers. If someone destroyed half of your Prince Ding mansion, would you be happy? Mo Xiuyao was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he said in a low voice, I hate Qi Lin. Han Mingyue paused. After thinking for a moment, she couldn't help but laugh. Do you hate Qi Lin? Or do you hate that Princess Consort treats other people or things differently? Princess Consort is different from other women. You should have known that a long time ago. Go, don't say that you hate Qi Lin. They are the most outstanding and admirable soldiers. Don't tell me that you don't feel regret. As Prince Ding, Mo Xiuyao could be said to be one of a kind. He was destined to like all the elite soldiers. How could he not like Qi Lin, the elite of the elite soldiers? To be honest, Mo Xiuyao still underestimated Qi Lin's fighting strength. He didn't even think that Yili would send Qi Lin to guard Fei Hong Pass. After all, compared to hundreds of thousands of soldiers, a troop of 1,000 people, no matter how elite, was still too small. Initially, Mo Xiuyao was already prepared for the annihilation of the entire Fei Hong Pass. However, he did not expect that it was this group of people that he did not expect to save the entire Fei Hong Pass. After a long silence, Mo Xiuyao walked in the direction of Yili. Xiuyao. Behind him, Han Mingyue suddenly called out. Mo Xiuyao turned around. He looked at him and raised an eyebrow in confusion. Han Mingyue said, We're still brothers, right? Mo Xiuyao nodded slightly. With a tap of his foot, he rushed in the direction of Yili. Looking at a certain person's figure hurriedly leaving, Han Mingyue couldn't help but chuckle. Who would have thought that Mo Xiuyao, who was in the dreams of countless maidens back then, who was unrestrained and unrestrained, would be so anxious now? Thinking about himself, young Master Mingyu raised his eyes and looked into the distance. His elegant lips hooked up in a calm and relaxed smile. Mo Xiuyao landed not far behind Yili like a light swan. He didn't make any noise. Qin Feng and the others looked at Mo Xiuyao and silently retreated. Mo Xiuyao looked at Yili sitting on the ground. He quietly walked over and sat on the ground like Yili. Xiuyao. Yili stopped playing the zither and asked in confusion, Didn't you say that Feng San and the others had something to discuss with you? Why are you here? Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, The war is over. No matter how big the matter is, it can be put aside for a while, right? Yili smiled and nodded. Now, except for Murongxin and Marquis Nan who were still leading the Dechu State's army in the south to fight against the West Hill, the Mahist army was already quiet. Lowering her head and thinking, Yili said, How to settle the families of the dead and seriously injured soldiers. Mo Xiuyao held her slightly cold hand and held it in his palm. He said, You can leave these matters to young Master Qingqin. Don't worry, Li. I promise that every dead soldier's funeral will be arranged properly. The same goes for Qi Lin. Yili smiled and nodded. She was not worried about Qi Lin. Qi Lin had a very perfect system, including compensation for casualties and serious injuries. Moreover, Qi Lin did not have many people, so it was fine as long as they followed the rules. However, the other soldiers of the Mahist army often suffered thousands of casualties. It was not easy to deal with them properly. Seeing Yi Li's worry, Mo Xiuyao promised firmly, I will tell all the generals to take care of their soldiers' funerals. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's solemn promise, Yi Li could not help but smile. She said, "Of course I believe you. You don't have to be so serious. I just said a few words casually." Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and did not say anything. Lily's heart was too soft, and she thought too much. However, Mo Xiaoyao knew that she was not thinking about the so-called kindness or the so-called noble character. She thought that this was how it should be. Yi Li had many ideas that were incompatible with the people of this era. For example, she thought that men should respect women. She thought that soldiers should protect the people. She thought that the country should take care of the soldiers' funerals. It was not that she thought that was wrong. It was just that for the people of this era, it was too absurd and difficult to do. However, perhaps it was because he loved Li, who was different from the rest. Mo Xiaoyao knew about her magical experiences. He even thought that Li's life in the previous world must be happier than in this world. That was why he wanted to give the world to her. He wanted to make her happier than before. Mo Xiaoyao took the ebony zither from Yi Li's hands and gently played it on his lap. Mo Xiaoyao's zither skills were actually better than Yi Li's. It was still the soul-summoning song. But in Mo Xiaoyao's hands, there was an even more impassioned and shocking feeling of vicissitudes. Yi Li listened to him play in a daze. Finally, she could not help but cry. Chapter 1039. After one song, Mo Xiaoyao let go of the ebony zither in his hand and reached out to pull her into his embrace. "Cry, Li Li. I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Yi Li leaned into Mo Xiaoyao's embrace and finally cried out loud. Mo Xiaoyao gently patted her back, his half-closed eyes filled with tenderness and love. When the two returned to the general's residence, they were greeted by young Master Feng San, who was on the verge of going crazy. Seeing the two walking hand in hand, Feng Zhiyao didn't care about anything else and rushed over. He grabbed Mo Xiaoyao's collar and shouted, "Prince Ding! Where did you run off to? Do you want the Prince Ding mansion or not? Are you going to deal with the documents in the study or not? More importantly, you were the one who told us to take care of things, but you ran off without a trace. What do you want?" Young Master Feng San was so angry that he couldn't care less about offending his superior. He roared at Mo Xiaoyao. Feng Zhiyao's sudden outburst really scared Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao quickly came back to his senses. He calmly pushed away Feng San's hand that was grabbing his collar and said, "Feng San, if you have something to say it slowly." Feng Zhiyao sneered, "Say it slowly. I want to say it slowly, but I have to be able to find the person first. We just finished the war and there are so many things to take care of. So many of us put down what we were doing to listen to Prince Ding's instructions. In the end, we couldn't even find the shadow of a person." Hearing this, Yi Li couldn't help but feel a bit guilty. In the end, Mo Xiaoyao ran out so willfully to find her. She took a step forward and whispered to Feng Zhiyao, "Feng San, today's matter." Feng Zhiyao raised his hand and said, "Wang Fei, you don't have to speak for him. What's more, we don't dare to blame His Highness Prince Ding, do we? We're just complaining for no reason. Please punish us, Prince." It was no wonder that Feng Zhiyao wanted to get angry. The war had just stopped, and the busy ones did not know that the Feihong Pass was in a mess. This war had lasted for nearly a year, and everywhere outside the Feihong Pass was a mess. Everyone was busier than before the war ended. However, the busiest person was nowhere to be found. Not only was Mo Xiaoyao nowhere to be found, even Han Mingyue, who was usually able to help out, was nowhere to be found. Feng Zhiyao looked at the empty study room and the piles of files for a long time. Finally, he couldn't help but vent. Everyone present, other than Yili and Imo Xiuyao, looked at Feng Zhiyao with admiration as if they were looking at a brave warrior. He dared to yell at Prince Ding in front of everyone. He really had a lot of guts. Imo Xiuyao unexpectedly had a rare good temper. He smiled and said, "All right, I know. Tomorrow morning, I promise to take care of everything." Feng Zhiyao raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow morning? Do you have a problem?" Imo Xiuyao said. "No." Feng Zhiyao quickly shook his head. As long as Prince Ding was willing to do it, the efficiency was very good. How could Feng Zhiyao have a problem? The group entered the study room and sat down. Feng Zhiyao took a breath before asking, "Why did Prince summon us this morning?" Just now, his anger rushed to his head. Now that he drank a cup of tea and calmed down, Feng Zhiyao also felt that he was a little impulsive. He was polite to Imo Xiuyao when he asked. Imo Xiuyao pulled Yili to sit down and said with a smile, "It's nothing. I just want to talk about how to deal with the casualties." Speaking of this, Feng Zhiyao's expression also became serious. He took out a file from the pile of files beside him and said in a low voice, "After nearly a year of fighting, the specific numbers haven't been calculated. But this time, there are casualties in Feihong Pass. Including Qilin, there were a total of 237,600 soldiers stationed at Feihong Pass. Only 13,127 of them survived. Among them, 19 of them were captains and above, and 7 of them were deputy generals." With such heavy casualties, even Imo Xiuyao was speechless for a long time. For so many years, besides the tragedy of the Maoist army in Huifeng Valley more than a decade ago, this was the first time there was such a heavy casualty rate. And these soldiers stationed at Feihong Pass were the elite soldiers of the Maoist army. They were not the soldiers of Dechu state that Imo Xiuyao had just taken in. Just one battle was so tragic, not to mention the casualties in the past half a year. With a rough estimate, the casualties of the Maoist army since the siege of Chu capital was broken up until now was at least 600,000 to 700,000 Maoist army elite soldiers. The Maoist army that originally had less than 1,000,000 elite soldiers now had less than 20 to 30% left. The rest were the remnants of Dechu state soldiers that had been taken in before. This time, Imo Xiuyao had taken in hundreds of thousands of Chu army soldiers, as well as the new recruits that had just entered the camp not long ago. This battle could not be considered a loss for both sides, but all sides that participated in the battle had paid a huge price. No wonder Imo Xiuyao did not plan to continue attacking the Dechu state and Xiling. Looking at the shocking numbers in front of them, the three could not help but be silent. The atmosphere also became more solemn. Imo Xiuyao thought for a while and said, "Feng San, have people passed down I's orders? All the soldiers that died in battle must be given out without exception. And the wounded soldiers must be properly settled. If there are any problems, have them come directly to I." Feng Zhiyao hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. To settle so many dead soldiers and wounded soldiers was undoubtedly a huge project for the Prince Ding mansion. But this was what they should do, and the only thing they could do. Let the dead rest in peace. Yili said, "All the silver from the exchange of prisoners from Xiling can be used on this. If it is not enough, you can ask Han Mingxi for more. Just let me know when you come back." Feng Zhiyao hurriedly thanked Yili. Imo Xiuyao thought for a while, then raised his eyebrows and said, "Li, do not worry. We will have other sources of income very soon." "Other sources of income?" Yili raised her eyebrows. Imo Xiuyao smiled coldly and said, "Of course. There is also the reparations from the northern tribes, Xiling, and Dechu state. A battle was not so easy to win. If they won, they might not be able to rest easy. But if they lost, they would be in big trouble. Since ancient times, the loser either had to pay tribute or cede territory to pay reparations. This was a common practice. Mo Xiuyao had no interest in paying tribute. Since it was not sincere, there was no need to put on an act. But reparations were necessary. Hearing this, Feng Zhiyao could not help but clap his hands and laugh. Prince is right. I forgot about this matter. It was already strange that the crown prince, who had been away on an expedition, suddenly returned. Now, he appeared with the token that represented the authority of Jinan Palace, which the prince would not give to anyone. How could they not feel uneasy? Everyone, please rise. Lei Tingfing said in a deep voice, Father has ordered that from now on, everything in the Jinan Duke's residence will be under my command. Everyone looked at each other in dismay, but they were somewhat hesitant. If it were Genom of Gojoseon, everyone would naturally follow Genom of Gojoseon. After all, compared to the incompetent emperor of Xiling, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Genom of Gojoseon was much stronger. However, if it were the crown prince of Genom of Gojoseon, it would be different. It was not that Lei Tingfing was not good, but Lei Tingfing was too young. Compared to Lei Zhenting's reputation, Lei Tingfing's reputation was much worse. We will only follow the prince's orders. The three generals bowed in unison. Lei Tingfing finally understood why his father had specially chosen these three generals to follow him back. Naturally, there were more powerful and outstanding generals in the army. However, those people were all veterans who had followed his father for many years. Their military achievements were outstanding, and he could not suppress them. Those who had power behind them were afraid that they would be disloyal. However, these three people were all promoted from ordinary soldiers by his father. Moreover, they had followed Lei Tingfing in the past and had a good personal relationship with him. Naturally, there was no need to worry about them being disloyal in the short term. Official Wu, what do you say? Lei Tingfing nodded and swept his gaze over the person who was still hesitating. Official Wu looked at Lei Tingfing and respectfully said, I wonder, what plans does the crown prince have? Lei Tingfing's eyes darkened. He stared at the people in front of him and suddenly, a faint smile appeared on his lips. I plan to try out the chair in Yangon Palace. What do you think? Official Wu's expression changed slightly. He smiled and said, Crown Prince, isn't this a little too hasty? Lei Tingfing was about to speak when a guard outside the door reporting to the Crown Prince, the Emperor has summoned you. Lei Tingfing snorted and said, I know. You can leave first. Lei Tingfing stood up and walked down from his seat. The people below hurriedly advised, Crown Prince, the Emperor rashly summoned you at this time. I'm afraid he doesn't have good intentions. Crown Prince, please be careful. Lei Tingfing smiled faintly and said, I suddenly returned to the capital. It would be strange if he didn't summon me. Besides, some things should be done sooner rather than later. Casually walking in front of Official Wu, Lei Tingfing said with a smile, Official Wu, don't you think so? Official Wu's face immediately turned pale and cold sweat quietly flowed down his forehead. See. Crown Prince. Lei Tingfing snorted and a cold light flashed. Everyone only heard the sound of a sword being sheathed. Lei Tingfing had already walked out of the hall. Everyone lowered their heads and saw Official Wu lying on the ground with his eyes wide open. A trace of blood slowly blossomed on his neck. This subject swears to be loyal to the Crown Prince. Lei Tingfing turned his head and said faintly, Everyone, there is no need to be nervous. Everyone is Imperial Father's trusted aide. As for Official Wu, Imperial Father has already said that he is not one of Imperial Father's people. The things are all here. Everyone can take a look. Lei Tingfing took out a booklet and placed it on the table. He didn't look at everyone's reaction and walked out. Lei Tingfing walked quickly in the Imperial Palace. Although it was called an imperial palace, it was more accurate to say that it was a converted mansion. After all, an imperial palace couldn't be built in a short period of time. Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon, Prince Rui, Leitingfing requests an audience with the emperor. Enchanting said in a clear voice as he walked to the entrance of a gorgeous imperial palace. The music in the imperial palace quickly stopped. After a while, an attendant came out and cautiously said, "Prince Rui, the emperor summons you in." Leitingfing nodded and was about to walk in when he was blocked by the eunuch. The eunuch smiled and pointed at the imperial bodyguards and several people who looked like generals behind him. He said, "Prince, isn't this a bit inappropriate?" Leitingfing raised his eyebrows and said, "I brought the 3 generals back to the capital to report on their work. What's wrong with that?" The eunuch had a bitter face and was in a dilemma. He naturally knew that bringing the generals back to the capital to report on their work would require an audience with the emperor. However, the emperor also ordered that only Leitingfing was allowed to enter. Leitingfing said in a low voice, "You don't have to worry. If the emperor blames me, I will take responsibility." The eunuch didn't dare to insist on stopping Leitingfing even though he was so domineering. After all, the people of Jinan Palace had always been rude in the imperial palace. Not to mention the servants, even the emperor had long been used to it. Chapter 1041. When Leitingfing walked into the main hall, he was greeted by the dizzying smell of alcohol and the fragrance of cosmetics. Even though outsiders might not know the inside story, Leitingfing's eyes couldn't help but flash with a trace of coldness when he saw this scene when his father died in battle. "Leitingfing greets your majesty." Leitingfing bowed his head in salute. The 3 generals behind him also saluted. "Generals Fengli, Zhang Yi, and Sheng Wanqing greet your majesty." The emperor of Xiling looked down with drunken eyes and said with a smile, "It's Tingfing. Come and sit down." Leitingfing stood up and walked to the front of the right and sat down. He said, "Tingfing thanks imperial uncle." The emperor of Xiling was thinner than 2 years ago when he was in the emperor of Xiling city. Years of alcohol and women had corroded his body, and his smiling eyes were muddy and lifeless. However, at this moment, when this pair of eyes looked at Leitingfing, it was filled with meaning. "Tingfing, aren't you following your father to attack the Mo family army? Why did you come back?" Leitingfing said, "Imperial uncle, imperial father received news that Southern Chu has abandoned their alliance with our country and has switched sides to the Prince Ding mansion. Murongshen and Marquis Nan of the Prince Ding mansion are personally leading the 300,000 Southern Chu army across the Yunlan River to invade our Xiling. Imperial father specially ordered Tingfing to come back and deal with this matter." "Oh." The emperor of Xiling looked at Leitingfing with some surprise. "Is there such a thing?" Tingfing's words are absolutely true. "If imperial uncle can't handle it, you can send someone to investigate. I'm afraid that the battle has already started at the Yunlan River." The emperor of Xiling nodded and said, "If so, what is Tingfing's plan?" Leitingfing looked up at the emperor of Xiling and said, "Tingfing plans to send Sheng Wanqing and Fengli to lead 500,000 soldiers to fight Murongshen and Marquis Nan 500,000. The emperor of Xiling looked at Leitingfing and asked, "Where do we have so many soldiers?" Enchanting had taken most of the elite soldiers of Xiling with him when he went to fight the Mahist army. Moreover, there were many soldiers stationed at the Yunlan River. It was no wonder that the Xiling emperor was worried when he brought so many troops out of Xiling. Tingfing looked down and said, Imperial uncle, what do you think we should do?" The emperor of Xiling was speechless. He had been suppressed by Enchanting all his life and had never been involved in military, political, and civil affairs. Even a genius would be exhausted one day if he continued like this, not to mention that he was not a genius. To be able to fight against Fing in the open and in the dark for so many years, it was all because of his honorable identity as the emperor and his innate proficiency in scheming. However, it was obviously not feasible to use it in a war. The Emperor of Xiling had been thinking about how to take back the power that belonged to him all his life, but he had never thought about how to be a good emperor after taking back the power. Fing hid the disdain in his eyes and said coldly, Murong and Marquis Nan are experienced generals. Father is not here now. If we don't send an army to stop them, I'm afraid that the Mahist army will come again, right in front of us. The Emperor of Xiling frowned and sighed. He habitually reached out to take the wine glass on the table and waved at Fing impatiently, saying, Fine, you go. We'll do as you say. Fing had just breathed a sigh of relief when suddenly a person who looked like a eunuch hurried in from outside and whispered a few words in the Emperor of Xiling's ear. The Emperor of Xiling's expression changed and looked at Fing with probing eyes. He waved his hand to let the eunuch leave. The Emperor of Xiling frowned and thought for a while. He asked, Fing, you haven't told me yet. How is the battle between our army and the Prince Ding mansion going? Fing said indifferently, Your Majesty is right. I'm going to report to you. The Emperor of Xiling nodded his head in satisfaction, saying, That's good. I'm also a bit worried. Don't deceive me. Deceiving the Emperor is a capital offense. Fing frowned coldly and said in a deep voice, Fing doesn't dare. Reporting to Your Majesty, I'm afraid that our army won't be able to defeat the Mahist army, we'll definitely lose. What? The Emperor of Xiling was shocked. Although he was useless, he had no enmity with his country. Originally, when he heard the servant report about Enchanting's defeat, he was gloating. However, when he heard Fing say that they'll definitely lose, he couldn't help but be shocked. He really didn't want to experience the feeling of the Mahist army invading the imperial city again. Furthermore, they moved from the north to An City last time. If Mo Xiuyao invades the city again, where can they go? For the first time in his life, the Emperor of Xiling realized that it might not be a good thing for the Western Tomb to be without Enchanting. Fing, your father, Fing didn't hide it and said in a deep voice, That's right. If I'm not wrong, my father has died for the country. Hearing this, the Emperor of Xiling couldn't help but be stunned. He had lived in fear for his entire life under Enchanting's pressure. Although there wasn't a moment when he didn't think about how to kill Enchanting. However, when he heard the news of Enchanting's death, his first reaction wasn't happiness, but helplessness. Now, what should we do? The Emperor of Xiling asked. Fing looked down and said indifferently, These 3 generals are the talents that my father left for the Western Tomb. Fing plans to send 2 of them to lead the army to attack Murong and Marquis Nan. If Mo Xiuyao personally leads the army to attack the Western Tomb, Fing is willing to live and die with the Western Tomb. There was no other way now. The Emperor of Xiling didn't beat around the bush and nodded, All right. I'll now confer you as the new Genom of Gojoseon. You'll guard the Great Tomb in place of my brother. In addition, General Feng, General Zhang, and General Shengwan, I'll confer them as the Protector General of the State, the General of the State, and the General of the State. With one sentence from the Emperor of Xiling, the 3 generals who were originally deputy generals immediately became first-rank generals of the Western Tomb. Thank you, Your Majesty. Fing bowed his head. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your grace. After Fing left the hall, the magnificent palace regained its tranquility. A man who looked like a eunuch walked out from the back and carefully looked at the Emperor of Xiling who was sitting on the dragon throne with his eyes closed. He whispered, Your Majesty, why are you not? They had already made arrangements. As long as Fing came, they could capture him. Without Enchanting, Fing was still young even though he was powerful. However, if he was given a few more years to mature, things would be different. However, they didn't hear the Emperor of Shiling's signal. The men of sacrifice lying in ambush could only watch Ladingfing walk out. The Emperor of Shiling waved his hand and said, Enchanting is already dead. If we kill Ladingfing, what will happen to Deling? Over the years, his only remaining children had either died or married off. In this huge palace, other than those concubines who only knew how to flatter him, he was the only one left. It could be said that he was truly alone. Now, even his lifelong enemy was dead, but Deling was still here. He had to leave something for Deling. Forget it, go. Pass down my order. Ladingfing is conferred the title of Genom of Gojosian. The previous Genom of Gojosian, Enchanting, has died for the country and will be conferred the title of Martyr of Loyalty. In addition, I am not feeling well. Genom of Gojosian will be the regent for the time being. The Chamberlain was stunned. Obviously, he didn't understand why the Emperor changed his mind in such a short time. However, he had to obey the Emperor of Shiling's order. This servant obeys. This servant will take his leave. It seemed that the Jinan Palace would have the final say in the future of Shiling. Ladingfing left the palace. Although he had obtained the full command of the Shiling army as he wished, his face was still gloomy. Just now, he really wanted to kill the Emperor of Shiling. He also knew that the Emperor of Shiling had placed men of sacrifice in the palace. However, he didn't expect that the incompetent Emperor of Shiling would suddenly make such a decision at that time. After a moment of hesitation, he had already lost his killing intent. Ladingfing couldn't help but smile bitterly. Compared to his father, he was still far behind. Ladingfing, who is it? Suddenly, a low voice faintly traveled into his ears. Ladingfing's expression changed and he immediately looked in the direction of the voice. Just a few steps away, a middle-aged man in blue clothes walked over and looked at him with an indifferent expression. Ling Tai Han. Ladingfing gritted his teeth and said. The voice he had just heard clearly came from far away, but Ling Tai Han had silently appeared in front of him. It had only been a short time since they last met, but Ling Tai Han's martial arts cultivation had reached a new level. Ling Tai Han nodded and raised his hand to throw something at Ladingfing. Ladingfing reflexively wanted to dodge, but he suddenly thought of something and reached out to grab the item that Ling Tai Han had thrown at him. It was a very ordinary jar made of white porcelain. Although it was wrapped in a layer of cloth, Ladingfing could feel what was inside as soon as he touched it. At the same time, he guessed why Ling Tai Han had thrown this to him. This is... Ladingfing tightly grasped the item in his hand as he stared at Ling Tai Han. Ling Tai Han indifferently said, "These are Enchanting's ashes. You burned my father." Ladingfing felt a wave of anger rush to his head as he glared hatefully at the man in front of him. Ling Tai Han nonchalantly glanced at him and sneered, "You should be glad that Mo Xiaoyao allowed me to burn Enchanting and bring him back." Ladingfing was silent. Of course, he knew how many people treated enemy generals who had been killed, especially when the person's status was very high. But at least, he had preserved the last bit of dignity as Jinan King of Gojosian. Jinan Palace will remember this. Ladingfing said seriously. Ling Taihan's lips curled into a mocking smile. He didn't look at Ladingfing again as he turned and left in a huff. On the street outside Jinan Wang's residence, Ladingfing held the bone ashes in his hands and was lost in thought. "Father, this child will definitely live up to your expectations." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.